Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are the P-LotPodcast. John here, once again, joined by the main man himself, Michael. We are the Angelillo cousins. Um, people
We're
think you're like
back.
people think you're my little brother. Sometimes when we go like hang out,
Assume we're brothers.
yeah.
Close, but
But
no.
close, dude. So
We had a week off and a lot of
we had a
stuff.
week off and a lot of crap happened. Most of
I
it like
guess
it's not good.
I guess we should have thought like, oh, it's gonna be a slow week, only NHL trade deadline stuff. So we'll, just push it back to the following week. Not realizing, I guess, that the following week was going to be NFL free agency. So this felt like I don't know if I'm right or wrong in saying this, but I'll just say it felt like one of the more active NFL excuse me, NFL, free agency periods, in a while.
This is
I
also
feel
probably
like
literally, Michael, one of the worst NFL free agency classes I've ever seen.
yeah, like, it just felt like a lot of and I think maybe that's part of it. Maybe because there wasn't so many great guys is why there were so many players switching teams because people felt a lot less pressured to keep their guys for whatever reason, but yeah, it totally felt like everyone was getting a piece of the pie. Everyone was losing players. Everyone was adding guys. It was all over the place. It felt very, very hectic. But before we get into that and go through the teams, we do still want to talk about the NHL trade deadline and some other Flyers related things. So the Flyers were once again, active around the trade deadline. This really does feel like Danny Briere is just getting everyone from the, Chuck Fletcher kinda effort out. Obviously, Frost and Farabee were traded a few weeks ago, and they made some few other trades. Nothing crazy, but they got, like, the big one, which was, ideal, and that was Scott Laughton. So first, though, um, we'll start with, I guess, they moved Eric Johnson back to Colorado, which was nothing more than like, all right, let's give the longtime Avalanche legend a chance at winning something and send him out over there. Nothing really crazy there. They flipped Andrei Kuzmenko, who was part of the Farabee and Frost trade, which I thought was nice. I don't know. Like I liked Kuzmenko, and I think the Flyers were encouraged by him enough to potentially make a play for him in the offseason to bring him back. And he was, obviously a Russian guy. I have good knowledge. He was spotted hanging out with Matvey Michkov in Northeast Philadelphia. I know that for like a fact. That's kind of funny. So they were all, they were close. So maybe it's a guy worth willing to call back up in the off season, but he was on an expiring, and you got a third round pick back and some players. They also, obviously, the big trade was Scott Laughton. So the Flyers traded Scott Laughton, a 2025 fourth round pick, and a 2027 sixth round pick to the Toronto Maple Leafs for a 2027 first round pick, which is top 10 protected as well, and winger Nikita Grabenkin, who is seen as like an intriguing prospect that has potential to be a pretty useful and helpful player, especially for this team. But um, mostly,
It
you wanted the draft capital out of Lawton, and you were
does
able to
it
get a first round
does
pick back.
does it really feel odd that the Flyers got more for Scott Lawton, who is a good third to fourth line center? He's like one of those, we call him like glue guys, right?
Hmm.
They got more for Scott Lawton than they did for like one of the greatest players in franchise history, Claude Giroux.
Well, that depends how you value Owen Tippett.
Well,
No, but
dude, people
it's
thought Owen Tippett was like
he was supposed.
the
Well,
same as Grabenko.
right. So Lawton, it sucks to trade a guy who's like you think about hockey culture and hockey people, and I think most people in the hockey world I have there's a big stigma, not even a stigma. There's a big notion around hockey culture that a lot of hockey players are maybe not the best of people for a multitude of reasons. And I think Scott Lawton is one of those guys that totally bucks that trend. Definitely one of the better people in the hockey world. Definitely one of the better people, probably in the sports world in terms of just the person. Obviously, has been a great teammate. All Flyers players that have come through have raved about how good of a teammate and player to play with Scott Lawton is. And to go along with all that good stuff and leadership qualities, he is a good, solid bottom six center, like you said, can play on the penalty kill, can get gritty if he needs to. He just fought the other night. Um, and shows flashes of some offensive skill. As I was at a game, he scored 4 goals in. So,
Mm.
um, Scott
Yeah,
Lawton
and
is
obviously,
a nice player.
like the Toronto Maple Leafs, like we've seen them, they just choke year in
Hmm.
and year out. Like, and listen, Lawton's not going to be is not the type of player that's gonna be a game changer on the ice per se. Like
No, no,
like
not at
his
all.
values, obviously a lot of his values in the locker room, and you kind of see like Austin Matthews is one of the young stars of the NHL, but you kind of saw it in the Four Nations. Like Austin Matthews, like just mentally just collapses. So maybe having a guy like a Scott Lawton there to kind of help keep his spirits up and not have him focus so much and I guess basically choke, I suppose. I don't know. You know?
Yeah, I mean, they've had their fair share of vets roll through those teams and still haven't been able to push them over the top. But Lawton, you talk about his value. He's definitely a lot more valuable on a team like the Maple Leafs as a bottom six center, where that bolsters your bottom six, where that line can create some offense. It's going to give you good defense, and then obviously the locker room presence. That's a lot more valuable to a team that's trying to win a Stanley Cup than a team like the
He's like
Flyers that
a
are
better
on the
version of
outside
like
looking in.
Patrick Beverly.
Yeah, yes, it's a very, very similar style of just journey. It's not right to call him a journeyman because he's not a journeyman, but it feels like Scott Lawton can be a guy that now that he's off the Flyers can virtually just
Win.
bounce around
Oh.
good teams and like be a part of some pretty deep playoff runs across the league that, oh, Lawton had a big goal there in the second period and the
Well, like
second round,
on like a good team, I think Scotty Lawton can score 15 to 20 goals. He's going to get you, really good player on the penalty kill. He's going to be like one of those, like I said, like a glue guy. Now,
Mhm.
I'll say this about the Flyers at the trade deadline. I think their aggressiveness really should have been determined. I think this sort of tips into the long term. I don't know how I'm trying to word this. Like basically their future when it comes to the coaching staff, because I think you and I, Michael, both definitely agree that the Flyers coaching staff is not. I'm gonna say, I guess, doing its job, or I guess my point being, when you're in a rebuild and when you're and when you're rebuilding, obviously your main focus is on developing young players, getting cap space, acquiring picks. So when you're ready to quote unquote go for it and like compete,
Mhm.
you have the foundation in place because that's how you look at all the contending teams in the NHL. They've all have
Mhm.
like their core group of guys, and then they go out and they make they acquire players like Rantanen, for example. Rantanen, he's on the Stars now, I believe.
Yeah, 'cause, Carolina could not get a deal with him, and they figured trading him and getting some good players back would be more beneficial than having him as a rental. So, yeah.
Well, yeah. But like, I think my point. I guess this kind of leads into like the two big names that did not get moved. So the one guy that was been thrown around for like months was Ristolainen,
Yeah,
Rasmus
Rasmus
Ristolainen,
Ristolainen.
and I went to the game like last week, and like Risto is the best player on the ice. Like they were like the Flyers looked terrible, but Risto was like when they were playing the Devils, he was the only one like winning 50-50 pucks. He was getting into the corners. He was blocking shots. Like he was the best performing player. So I can kind of see why the Flyers wanted so much for him because he could be the guy on a contending team that's missing a defenseman that could be like, okay, he kind of helps, he protects our more offensive minded defenseman. He really shores up the back or
Yeah,
what.
I mean, Risto has certainly night and day from when he first got here to now. He really he lowered the amount of hits that he throws, but he replaced throwing his body around with just better positioning yourself, and he's gotten a lot better because of it. And I know, he doesn't seem to be a part of the future plans, especially at his contract. However, since he does have so many years left and stuff, there's not a total imminent rush to move on from him. You can be a little bit more picky on the return for Ristolainen, um, and kind of go from there. Maybe next deadline, maybe just the off season. You'll see. I'm not totally upset that they ended up keeping him as I would have been early in the season when I was very hell bent on just being get him off the team as for a good haul because you don't know how long this is going to last. Feels like he's created a sustainable way of good hockey at this point. So it's a guy that can definitely be moved on from later.
And the other guy, and I think this leads into the one Flyers talking point we want to do before we move on to football. Spend the rest of the show talking about football. Is Cam York. So Cam York's a restricted free agent. He's going to command a fairly large salary increase. And my thing is because Torts basically hates Cam York. If you want to keep Torts long term, you're going to most logically you get rid of the players he doesn't want, and then you bring in the players he would want to coach, or the types
Yeah,
of players he want to coaches.
and it's just frustrating because I think Cam York's a good player. I think you look at the numbers point to it, and it just kind of makes sense with what you see too, where he's clearly been playing better hockey this year than last year. But he plays alongside Sanheim, and I think is a big reason why Sanheim is having as successful of a run this year as he has been. And it's just not good when Tortorella's doing this again, and when I say doing this again, I mean he did this with Sean Couturier, he did this with the captain, where he scratched him and he didn't really explain why to the player, you know? Like, when that article comes out and Cam York is like, "I'm not playing for him, basically, I'm playing for, you know, the name across my chest, and I'm playing for the boys in that locker room, and I'm playing for those guys, and I wanna do as best I can for them. I'm not doing I'm not playing because of the coach." And then when they ask him, "Well, why'd you get sad?" And he goes, I just there's a lack of communication." John Tortorella didn't explain to Cam York, the player, why he was not going to be in the lineup that day. He just scratched him, and then he gives the answer to the media, 3 days later, Tortorella, "Oh, yeah, I just think everything he's been doing has been pretty average." And it's like, 1, you're saying this to the media, it's like you're bad-mouthing the guy. It's like you just it's not inspiring. I don't know. If I was a player and I got benched and I didn't really know why, and then a couple days later I see my coach talking about me and just saying everything I've been doing is pretty average, and I would be like, "Well, I thought I was kind of playing well. I thought my teammates kind of thought I was playing well too. But you're saying I'm playing average. You didn't even tell me that." He did the same thing to Sean Couturier, where he benches players, scratches them, and he doesn't connect that bridge of why. He doesn't talk to the player and have a conversation and say, "Hey, Cam, I'm gonna have you down this game. I think you need to be doing this, this, this a little bit better." Even if it's wrong, because he probably is wrong because he's not a good coach, at least you're having that communication for it. You can't even get the communication right, and I think that's a pretty damning fact and is, at this point, inexcusable. You're trying to rebuild here, you're not a winning team, you don't have a winning culture. He hasn't been a winning coach in, over 5 years. I I just think it's ridiculous that he thinks he can kinda get away with it, and he does get away with it, and I hope that this is the last season that we see him coach, and it's very, very frustrating um, the way it goes with certain
Well,
guys
I,
on this
I feel
team.
like if there's any in hockey or any sport where it's all about the Jimmies and the Joes and not the X's and the O's, I
Mhm.
do feel like it is hockey as well. Hockey
Yeah,
and basketball are the two main sports, right? And the Flyers, Michael, let's just be honest. This is not a good roster. The Flyers
no,
are just not good.
a bad
But
scheme can drag you down for sure in hockey, like Carolina, for example. But if you don't have good players, like, your floor is just non-existent.
but I do find though, like the Flyers, like their horrific power play, their
Which, by
breakouts.
the way, that's people can blame Rocky Thompson, which absolutely, but we can't forget and can't ignore that in I think it was 16 of John Tortorella's 23 seasons as a head coach, 16 of them, his team's power play has been in the bottom third of the league. So, clearly, it's a him issue much more than it's like, "Oh, Rocky Thompson blew," which he does blow, absolutely, but maybe that's part of it. Maybe part of it is John Tortorella employing bad coaches that he thinks are good to run his power play, because it can't be, like, I don't know, it can't be some crazy coincidence when you look at a guy, 16 of his 23 coaching seasons, the power play's in the bottom third of the NHL. It's
I
unbelievable.
and I think the significance. So Chris Pronger, former Flyer, he went on Twitter and replied to Charlie O'Connor from PHLY, who covers the Flyers. This is essentially, this would be like if, I don't know.
Like, God rest his soul, like, Roy Halladay was saying something about the Phillies or
Yeah,
kinda,
or I
yeah.
don't know. I would say like Jimmy Rollins or Chase Utley like
Like, Jason
commented,
Kelsey in, like, 8 years saying something about the
or I would say it's like Chase Utley or Jimmy Rollins just like quote tweeting out of nowhere. I didn't even know Chris Pronger was active on Twitter, to be honest.
I actually did. I say he tweets every now and again. He tweets a lot of stuff about, uh, like, concussion related things too. Like,
So Pronger, I like who's like a like I forget who's like the Phillies like beat writer who's like everyone kind of
what, Matt Gelb or whatever?
it would be like if like Chase Utley quotes tweet Matt Gelb about like the Phillies bullpen usage or like
Yes.
Bryson talking about like Bryson Stott or something.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
just like completely out of left field.
Yeah.
And he's like basically he's calling like he doesn't even say Torts by name, but you know he's directly talking about John Tortorella. Like
Mhm.
this is
Do you have the tweet up?
I do have the tweet up, Michael. I'm going to read you. This is his response to. I'm going to read you Charlie O'Connor's tweet and then Chris Proger's response to or comment on Charlie O'Connor. This is Charlie O'Connor now.
Mhm.
Cam York was scratched on Saturday by John Tortorella, and York spoke out in the decision after practice. He didn't agree with it. He said he hasn't had much communication with Torts on it. If there was communication, then maybe I would understand. And then Pronger commented, he did this with Couturier last year. What is the reason? This is Pronger now. He did this with Couturier last year. What is the reasoning? Have the media gotten an answer? If the player is not playing up to par, then explain exactly what he needs to fix to be more effective. Not use, quote, he needs to be better. That is a cop out.
Yeah, totally great answer. And then, if I remember correctly, Charlie O'Connor goes, "Well, he did explain it to the media here." And Pronger goes, "I'm not talking about explaining it to the media. I need you to explain it to the player." Like, it is he'd almost prefer you not give them he would
I have
prefer.
his response back too.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So this is what Charlie Connor said. Couturier last year, he was asked multiple times by the media for reasons and he wouldn't give details. He was more open today about his reasoning behind the York scratch. Pronger, not so much worried about him being open with the media, more so with the players so they could try to make the necessary changes. When the player comes out and says they don't know and haven't been communicated to, that is a problem. Now, Chris Pronger, Michael, as you know, he played like
3
16,
years here or something.
16, 18 years in the NHL. He's like a bona fide Hall of Famer, one of the greatest defensemen in the history of the National Hockey League. You
Yeah, I
know,
mean, he
coached
1,100
coached
games.
under probably some of the hardest coaches to play for, right?
Mhm.
Like he's basically like I don't like I said this to you. I was like, I don't know if he's angling for something because it seems very odd that all of a sudden he's just wants to talk about the Flyers. Which to your point, when he go like he's not really known as a Flyer. He's mostly known as like a St. Louis Blue.
And I mean, he won a cup with the Ducks as well. He holds his Flyers time very near and dear to himself because I think he as a professional is just frustrated that the
Well, I think
injuries
so.
really.
People, the fans here appreciate hockey. Where like no
Well, I
offense,
think it's
no offense to Anaheim, but
yeah, but
like
it's
you kind of
also
see my point.
I think he feels like he had unfinished business here. Obviously went to the cup his first year here, and then they didn't get back, and I think a big part of it was just the fact that he wasn't healthy for the next 2 playoff runs. Like, if he was healthy the following season, they don't get, especially the last year of his career where he eventually got injured and that ended his career, where it was the first year after, like, the Richards-Carter trade, and they had, the new faces in there, Voracek, Shen, and Simmons. That team that ended up losing to the Devils in 5 in the second round, they could have greatly used Chris Pronger as your number 1 defenseman was Braden Coburn, and no disrespect to Braden Coburn, but he was never number 1 defenseman capable player, and they needed just another top flight elite body, and Chris Pronger was exactly that. That team could have went absolutely further than it did, and I think he views that as, like, frustrating, and he has some sort of attachment to the Flyers because of it. Anyways, like you said, does it seem like he's angling for something? Maybe he is. He's a guy that is clearly smart enough and is a really nice blend of the old school style of hockey and understanding where the new school is coming from and listening to it and stuff, to where he could definitely make use of being in current NHL front offices. Um, and I think maybe he's pushing for some sort of advisor role or something in the Briere front
Well, he's
office.
he's friends with Danny Briere, and
Mhm.
he is very well acquainted with Keith Jones. They both played in the
Listen, it's a
NHL.
former Flyer, so that checks their boxes,
But I guess the
better or
point,
for
so
worse.
like I think the Flyers are weird, Michael. I feel like
They are weird.
everyone would just complain about all, like why do we just bring back former Flyers? And yeah, I feel like every like non person with no connection to the Flyers they bring in is an absolute disaster.
Yeah, like, can they just get someone smarter from outside the team's history for once? Like, that'd be pretty cool.
But like
But
I think with I mean, so like I don't know, man. If the guy who's friends with the GM and potentially the president is
mhm,
calling out the
the
coach,
coach, yeah.
it makes you wonder: has Briere and Jonesy sat down with Tortorella and say like, dude, like we need you to be more communicative? And Torts doesn't care because he's got FU money.
Mhm.
He's getting FU money from the Flyers, and like if they fire him, they got to pay him what he's owed.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice. I hope that causes, them to come down on board.
Trading Lawton to me what I've read to me like when you saw like their free fall after the trade deadline, even though they did have a good comeback, they did have a good overtime win against the Lightning. Like it's to me, it just looks like Torts is going to retire or get bumped upstairs, or he's going to get some Fugazi role. So
He's off the bench.
yeah, get him off the bench, and they got to bring in. I don't know, bring in like
I'll say it again, bring in someone I'd never heard of. Bring in some assistant that I've never heard of and, like, is gonna be just something totally new. Like, at this point, it feels like the next coaching hire for the Flyers, as as important as it is, it might not be any it feels like it's almost easy to replace, It was like replacing Joe Girardi from the Phillies. It's a very similar situation where you replace Joe Girardi with chiller, calm, cool Rob Thompson, let the players play loose, and they've had the best stretch of Phillies baseball since, '08. I think the Flyers, although they don't have the talent nearly that the Phillies have and aren't gonna go on some Stanley Cup run next year, I think that if you get a coach that's gonna, like, instill confidence into the players and allow them to play loose without having to worry about, getting screamed at or getting benched for a period or getting scratched, I think you're just gonna see better results immediately. Like, I'm not saying they're gonna be some great team, but if you put together a couple off seasons, couple drafts, and you hit on some key players to really start building out the roster, and you combine that with the coach that's gonna not be such you know, a dinosaur rage monster at these players, I think the team's gonna be in a much better spot. I think it's a very important coaching hire, and I think it's just not gonna be that difficult. Don't bring in some, retread old guy, bring in someone that's maybe never done it before, I think that's sort of the angle that they should be heading for. But we will see what they end up doing. This is a big off season for them, and I think a lot of stuff's going to change. Anyways, on to the main course for this show. We have NFL free agency, the frenzy, madness. A lot of players changing. Players got traded. Players got signed. Players left, re-signed, etc., etc., etc. So I guess we'll start in the AFC East. Is that where we want to start?
Sure, why not, Michael? Let's start the AFC
All right, the
East.
Buffalo Bills, the first place representative, the AFC runner-up. They first and foremost they extended Josh Allen. They gave him a nice fat extension. They also gave one to Khalil Shakir. They made it a point to extend their best players on their team, their most important players, and I think that was you got to do it. I think it was good. I think it was smart. And then on a bargain sort of way, they were able to get some pretty talented players, um, like in pretty favorable contracts. Um, they they cut Von Miller and then they let Mac Hollins go, and to replace that, they were able to get Joey Bosa on relatively cheap money, and they brought in Josh Palmer, who had some talent playing under Justin Herbert and um,
Eh,
those Charger teams. Hey, it's just a body. It's a solid body, and yeah, I think they actually had a pretty quiet, like decent off season. I think that Larry Ogunjobi is actually a nice interior defensive lineman that
yeah, well,
can
did
help
you see
stop the
the
run.
well? Did you see the news that it came out with the Bills that two of their free agent signings failed PEDs, including Ogunjobi?
Ogunjobi, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
It wasn't anything splashy, but it was decent.
I feel like being a Bills fan right now is in hell because, like, on one hand, well, when we
You
talk
know
about,
you have a team that feels good enough to go to a Super Bowl, you
but
know?
you just don't have like your best skill position player is like going on Twitter every time someone talks about a running back getting paid, just going bonkers, and you don't really use them like a featured back in James Cook. You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I think Ray Davis could be good, but like, dude, it's sort of like
James Cook is really good, man, and it's just every year they do the same garbage where during the regular season, they like restrict his pitch count and it works. and then the playoffs roll around, and then they unleash him, and it's like, "Oh my god, it's so good." And then, for whatever reason, they just kinda stopped unleashing him and letting him just kinda go. I don't know, it was weird, but they're
Well,
close, they're not like the problem with Buffalo is that I think they need to have a season where they're, like, far and away the best team in the AFC. They need to have a year where it's like, "Okay,
they go 15-2 and just blow it,
well,
beat
just like
everyone up.
roster wise, like before the season, we got to be looking at the Bills roster and be like, this is the best roster in the AFC. And I think it's a pretty decent gap. And I just, every time they enter a year, it feels like they're in the top 3 to 5 rosters in the AFC. And they're just like, maybe things go our way. And they just don't. So moving
Yeah.
on,
Moving on.
Miami Dolphins,
Oof.
pretty quiet
Well,
off season, I would say.
yeah, I
They,
mean, signing Zach Wilson and
yeah,
fantasy football, like fun player in Nick
Nick Westbrook
Westbrook
Akine.
Akine. Well,
Yeah.
they lost
No.
Javon Holland, their all pro safety.
Mhm.
And this is the second straight offseason the Dolphins fail to retain a key player on defense.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
sure, and listen, I would not be surprised if the Dolphins, because they're very, I don't think the Dolphins are very well run. They might
Mhm.
draft. They're going to be like, oh, we're going to draft a safety to
Yeah.
replace Javon Holland, which you know I think maybe with like their cap situation is probably the smart move. But it's like when you're wasting draft picks on like players you let go because you want to pay them because you're paying
Yeah.
Tua $55 million a year and you can't afford to retain them.
Yeah.
That's just it's why the Dolphins are in like purgatory, I suppose.
Yeah, and they also lost a couple guards, so they replaced one, with James Daniels. He only played 4 games last year due to a torn Achilles. Um, Graded out in this, since entering the league in 2018, grades out as like an average guard. Above average pass blocker, and I would say he's above average player. Got him on a cheap deal coming off an Achilles tear, 8 million a year over 3 years. So we'll see how that works out for them. On to New England. The Patriots had a very active free agency for sure. They had money to spend and they spent it. So before it opened, they re-signed Austin Hooper. Not really major anything there, but they added definitely notable players on both sides of the ball. We could start with the offensive side, I guess, because it was less. Morgan Moses, he's been in the league for quite some time. Signed him to a 3-year, $24 million contract. He is going to be entering his age 34 season, I'm pretty sure. But he will be, their starting tackle. And from what reporters and stuff are saying, Morgan Moses always had a pretty strong voice in the locker room, been a good leader, and I think that's just part of Mike Vrabel trying to flip over the culture to what he wants it to be.
Well,
And
he's
then in
definitely a
addition,
stopgap player because listen, Rome wasn't built in a day,
right,
and obviously New England. I mean, look, dude, like
you need some guys to keep.
I think they potentially hit a home run with Drake May, but then not drafting Lad McConkey and to trade back, and then you take Jalen Polk, who, like, let's face it, of all the rookie wide receivers, like he
He was
looks like
pretty disappointing.
he's like going to be the worst of all the.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, you need someone to keep Drake May upright until you get like a cornerstone tackle. And
Well,
I
then
think
there's
Morgan Moses does a
obviously with
decent
the
job.
Eagles, which we'll talk about the Eagles last, like we normally do, but the
Yeah.
Patriots did something which I did not even like know this was the case, but they signed Milton Williams.
Yeah.
Milton Williams, Michael, is now the highest paid player in New England Patriots history.
That's kind of funny. He's the third highest paid defensive tackle in football. I knew they were gonna. I saw that they were gonna be in on him. I knew they would be in on him because Milton Williams' market was very obviously like the bad teams that have a lot of money to spend. Not that good teams didn't want Milton Williams, but good teams were just always going to be priced out on Milton Williams. He had a fantastic season last year, only 25 years old, gonna be 26, for the season. It just it's a prime candidate. It's about as good as a free agent can get, but with that being said, do I think he's the 3rd highest paid defensive tackle worthy? No, I do not. But he got
It's
26 million a
very
year.
reminiscent to when the Jags signed Christian Kirk.
Oh, I
Christian
think
Kirk
he's a lot better than
Well, no,
Christian
Christian
Kirk.
Kirk was like what I mean by that is that Christian Kirk, when he got signed by the Jags, I believe was like the third or fourth highest paid receiver in football at that point.
Was he? I didn't
Hmm.
think he got that much money.
Yeah, it's incompetence tax.
Okay, yeah, fair. But yeah, I think that I think Milton Williams is gonna have a nice year, but like they have like Christian Barmore is a really damn good defensive tackle. And granted, was dealing with some blood clot issues last year, but you know, if he has a very good season, Barmore again, it'll really help out Milton Williams to look good. But if Milton Williams becomes the focus of like double teams and stuff, it'll be interesting to see
Well,
um,
so
how that
we
turns.
have the same notes. So Milt only played 48% of the Eagles' defensive snaps.
They rotate. The only
Well,
player that
you're not
played.
paying Milton Williams $26 million a year to be a literally a part-time player.
No, he's going to be getting what Jalen Carter was getting last year in terms of workload. Not coming off the field much. So it's a totally
No,
different thing. He's got to come in better.
well, this is
Not
what I
like he
find.
was in
Now, this
bad
is what I
shape, but
find very interesting, and this is where, like, if you're did you listen to his press conference? I don't think this is going to work out for New England, and I'm not saying this because I'm not being a homer. I'm just reading the tea leaves. So, he does his presser, and he was like, "Oh, this is the most important day of my life." Basically, was basically getting a lot of money, which is great, right? But like, if you're New England, if you're like a Patriots fan, and you're thinking like, we've won 6 Super Bowls, this guy just won a Super Bowl, and he's more concerned about money. Like he just said it outright. Like he's only here to get paid. Like, is he just going to come here for a year or two, get like 40 million? We cut him, and then he's just going to go back to the Eagles
I mean,
because that's what. Because Michael, remember, if you remember with New England when they would let their free agents go, they would just play a year or two with the team, get cut, and then just go back to New England.
I guess that's pretty like a damning way to think about the Milton Williams signing. If you're going to be a Patriots fan, feels like a pretty awful way to
Because
think
that's what
about
you
it.
used to do. That's why. That's
Well,
your team
it'll
used to
be
do that.
interesting if Milton Williams is just going to mail it in for 2 years, which I'd be shocked. The way like his I those clips of his dad and the way that he watches Eagles games and like screaming along just like any other normal fan. I feel like he was raised a certain way to not just mail it in. Like
I'm
I'd be
not saying.
shocked if
Listen,
we're
I'm not saying he's going to mail it in. What I'm saying is that when he was on the field, he was maybe like the Eagles' 10th best player on the field when they line up on defense, potentially 10th or ninth best. And
Jesus,
now he's
man.
on New England. Now he's going to supposed to be really technically their best player on defense if you're going to go by salary, if you want to be honest.
I mean, I hear
I
you.
mean, obviously he's not their best player on defense. I think Christian Gonzalez, when he's healthy, is their best player on defense. But
Sure. I mean, I don't know. I think we are forgetting a bit Milton Williams how good he was. Like I don't think it's
oh, Milton Williams was really good, but he was a part-time player, Michael. It's like
sure. I don't know. I think that he's I don't know. It'll be interesting. We'll see. But they also made some other moves. Robert Spillane 3-year, $37 million contract to be a starting linebacker. Harold Landry, who got cut from the Titans, 3 years, $43.5 million, coming off some injury. Carlton Davis got paid pretty lucratively, 3 years, $60 million, to be the number two corner at age 28. He needs to be healthy. He's a guy that's actually has in his eighth year has never played all 16 games or 17 games, which surprises me a bit. But yeah, we're gonna be seeing how they clearly
Obviously,
made it a point to improve their defense, and they got a bunch of big names and a bunch of needs acquired, and I think that that's a good start
do you
for.
find it interesting that they spent almost the entire, like their entire free agency on defense as opposed to trying to get more O linemen to help protect Drake May? Uh,
Well, I think that
please recall why Drake May did not start the season, Michael. Remember
I
why
mean,
he didn't?
I think the O-line market was kind of a disaster this year, and I think Morgan Moses on um, on the contract that he got of 8 million a year to be a starting tackle is a pretty favorable bargain. And I just think that it's better for New England to get a stopgap like that and then really try to build through the draft with your offensive line than paying like 18 million a year for guys that I don't think are that good of like guards and stuff like
I'm
that.
gonna. That's
I think
this is an interesting take because we're gonna talk about another team that really revamped its offensive line for their second year quarterback, but we'll talk about
right.
them later. But yeah, and
Yeah.
then lastly we have the New York Jets.
Yeah,
Wow,
so the Jets, their big move and pretty much their only move of note was new quarterback, Justin Fields. Justin Fields played 4 games and got benched and was rewarded with a $30 million guaranteed contract, 2 years, 40 million. This works because they're both two guys that they're a team that no one wants to go to, and they're a quarterback that no one wants. And this is what you get. There's a lot of people on Twitter that are like, "Oh, this feels like this is gonna it just makes sense, like, it's just gonna work out," and I'm like, "I'm not really sure what these people are thinking. You're taking a quarterback that is not good. He makes the same mistakes he's made in college. Sure, he's got a lot of talent, especially with his legs, but we've seen him play quarterback for a while now and not really have been moved once. And you go to a franchise that is notorious for ruining quarterback careers, there's a reason that
well,
of all the
Justin Fields
quarterbacks
doesn't have a
available,
career to ruin.
well, you look at all the quarterbacks that were available, and you have Aaron Rodgers, career got ruined by the Jets, like finished. Geno Smith, career got derailed by the Jets. It took him like 8 years to have a resurgence and bring his career back to anything. Sam Darnold, firsthand, career ruined by the Jets for sure. Zach Wilson, drafted by the Jets, disaster from the gate. So, of all the quarterbacks that got moved and were available, I'm not really sure any of them were actually available to the Jets besides Justin Fields and I guess Russell Wilson, but they took the shot on the younger one. So that's what you get here with the Jets. Not really a big free agency for the Jets, and I don't
Well, I think
think
it's smart
that's
of the
surprising.
Jets to at least. See, here's the thing with Fields is that I think the Jets are being smart, not marrying themselves to a Jackson Dart or, oh God, Michael, who's like the fourth best quarterback in this draft. Is it going to be McCord?
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's not going to be Will Howard. Will Howard should probably be undrafted. Like, in all
Well,
honesty.
I mean, all yeah, it's a weak quarterback class, and there's no reason for the Jets to draft one just for the sake of drafting one. You might as well just, I guess, take a shot. I guess if that's how much it was going to cost, I guess you got to give up $30 million for a guy that you know is a bad quarterback. But alas, we will see. On to the AFC North, we can start with the Ravens. They re-signed Ronnie Stanley. That was a guy that I think a lot of people thought was going to be moved this year. Um, 3 years, 60 million. Definitely has injuries, and he's already going to turn 31 before the regular season starts, which shocks me. Did not realize Does not feel like he's that old,
It
but
does feel like he's been around forever, though.
I didn't think that long. Like, I feel like when I first really started to pay attention to, like, NFL drafts heavily is when Ronnie Stanley started coming around, but, um, he has missed 36 games over the last 5 seasons due to some serious injuries, and his 5-year, a hair under $100 million contract that he signed back in 2020, you know, he's a guy that even at his age should have been able to sign a pretty massive contract as a left tackle, but the only thing that's keeping him from signing anything that massive are his injury concerns. So, if you get Ronnie Stanley healthy, 20 million a year is going to feel like the huge bargain. But that's the big question. The other notable move is they signed DeAndre Hopkins, 1 year, 5 million. Everyone calling it like the retirement home of receivers.
Well,
They,
Michael, if you
yeah,
recall, Zay Flowers is the first ever wide receiver that the Ravens have drafted to make the Pro Bowl.
interesting. So, yeah, I mean, they need some receiver help. They feel like they need it every year because even their better guys have some flaws. DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, now when I say this, I feel like a jack because of the Super Bowl, but a sure-handed veteran that, like, is just a beneficial body
Even
to
if you
have
caught
out
that
there.
pass, they weren't going to win that game.
No, obviously not, but, like, I don't I've never seen him really drop a pass that easy to catch in his life, but it's just another guy that helps a lot. He clearly has, like, some juice left. He's not, like, totally fully cooked.
Well,
He's got a
clearly
little
they
bit of
want
something left.
Bateman. I think they like Bateman in the slot or have move Zay Flowers around in the slot. So you do need that like flank, like that outside receiver.
Mhm. Yeah.
And they obviously, because the draft is so barren at wide receiver, and the fact that the Ravens have a lot of young, like, obviously have a lot of young receivers. Maybe they want D Hop there to help mentor like a Zay Flowers. Michael, if you recall, Michael, in the his rookie season, he had a complete meltdown in the AFC
Mhm.
Championship game. You know, so maybe they want to bring him there to help mentor Zay Flowers into becoming like a top 10, top 5 NFL wide receiver. Maybe that's their thought
Yeah.
process. It doesn't cost them a lot of money. It's like a joke that they're like they sign every old wide receiver. It is kind of funny that
Mhm.
that this is kind of like their thought process. But they've been doing this for years, man. So it's like,
Yeah.
you know,
So, on to Cincinnati. They made a lot of defensive signings. Joseph Asai, Cam Sample, Marco Wilson as, like, some more depth guys, but then BJ Hill, 3 years, 33 million, a 30-year-old interior defensive lineman, again, will help out the run game a lot. And you gotta, if Trey Hendrickson is gonna eventually get traded, you really just gotta build out that D line again. TJ Slayton from the Packers. And yeah, they're a disaster. They also signed Oren Burks to a 2-year deal. He's going to be a starter. That's another Eagle that got signed away. A guy that the Eagles would have probably willingly paid that money amount to, but when you're Oren
he's
Burks and you
obviously
hear
gonna be he's obviously gonna start on the Bengals.
right, he was promised the starting role, so he's not going to pass up that opportunity. Um, becomes a theme for some of the guys that end up leaving here. Very little risk. Clearly showed that he can play. The Bengals, though, they have their own issues on the offensive side of the ball because obviously their defense is an atrocity. Like Trey Hendrickson led the league in sacks, yet the Bengals were like 28th in sack rate, which feels insane. Like I can't even fathom how that's
He's the only
possible.
guy that's capable of getting
The
home
only
to get
guy.
a sack.
And Hendrickson, while very good at getting sacks and getting pressure on the quarterback, does struggle a bit in the run game as a defensive
Henderson's a
player.
weird guy, Michael, where like he
He's
gets all these
also a
stacks, but
specialist.
no one ever talks about him like when we bring up like best edge rushers. Like there's clearly three guys
Well, those
or
guys
like
have such a bigger impact in the run game.
yeah, well, yeah, obviously like
I think
Parsons,
they're just better players,
Watt,
and
and
Garrett.
Garrett.
Yeah, so he's clearly, like, in that tier of terms of strictly pass rushing, but as a complete defensive player, there's definitely, I think, a gap. But on the offensive side of the ball, so they franchise tag T. Higgins again, which if I'm T. Higgins, my patience has to be growing so thin with them.
Well,
He
Michael, there was a report that him and Jamar Chase are going to sign for a combined AAV of $70 million.
Yeah, the rumor was that it was gonna be, like, it's either one of them are staying or it's either both of them are staying or both of them are leaving. And they made a promise to Jamar Chase that, "We're gonna make you the highest paid non-quarterback." And if they had just made that promise and then did that deal, they coulda got him for, like, 33 million a year, maybe 35 million a year. You wait as long as you wait, and Myles Garrett signs, and he's making 40 million a year as the highest paid non-quarterback. So Jamar Chase is now in line to make somewhere between 40.1 and 45 million a year. So the Bengals, in their own procrastination, I guess, is going to cost themselves at least like an extra couple million a year. Well, it's actually going to be a lot more because you could have been minimum, it's costing you an extra 5 just to get up to 40, and now you wanna go over that, so now you're looking at it's costing you, like, 7 or so. They just I don't know, every step of the way, they screw up, and we talk about, Burrow even said, "Oh, the Eagles seem to keep everybody." And then you think about it, and you're like, "Well, what do the Eagles do with their star players that they really, really like and they wanna keep long
Lock them
term?"
up
They
as soon as
do it
possible.
early. AJ Brown, when obviously he got traded here, got 25 million a year. But what did they do pretty soon after he got here? Give him the extension. We know we're going to want to keep him instead of waiting till it actually comes around to him being a free agent and his price tag is going to be up around 40 million a year because Jamar Chase is going to get paid that much. Jefferson got paid that much. Instead, you went out and you did it before all those other guys. So what's AJ Brown making? 31 million a year, something like that, which is still a lot, but it's not 40. You didn't take a massive jump because you went out and did it. Devonta Smith, every day we should, as fans, count our lucky stars that he doesn't ask for as much money as he probably could get. And he's only getting like 25 million a year. But that's another guy, though, that if we waited around with and we're seeing, oh, T. Higgins is going to get 30 and Jalen, those guys are going to get 30. Well, then Devonta Smith's going to want 30. But what did the Eagles do? They go out, they do it early, and we don't have to deal with the headache that comes around with waiting to sign your star players that we're currently seeing with the Cincinnati Bengals. They waited around, and now they're going to have to give Jamar Chase market setting contract money just because they were like you knew after his rookie year that you were going to want to extend him. You knew for 4 years that you were like, "Okay, we're definitely gonna wanna keep Jamar Chase long term." So why wait? What are you waiting for? You know you're gonna do it. You're not gonna trade him or cut him or let him walk or anything. What's the harm in being like, "Hey, Jamar, we wanna get you paid, man," and figuring it out?
I mean, since he came into the NFL, Michael, Jamar Chase to me, like it's been a debate between, in my opinion, between like him and Justin Jefferson for who like the best, like the number one receiver in football, because both have
Mhm,
consistently been at. It's like Randy Moss and Terrell Owens. It's like you
mhm,
debate every year who had the better year. Was it
mhm,
Jefferson or was it Chase? So like
mhm.
it just does not make, you're absolutely correct. It makes absolutely no sense to even entertain the idea that he's going to hit free agency.
And now you get in this pissing contest where you're like, "All right, don't worry, we'll take care of you. You'll be the highest paid non-quarterback." And then you wait longer, and now you just cost yourself at least another five
Well,
million a
not just
year.
that too. Like if there's some sort of like Jamar Chase Bengals divorce, at least if you get him under contract and trade him, you at least get something back for him.
Right. Right. It's stupid. It's why the Bengals will never be good. It's why they're bad. They've been bad their whole existence, and it's why they're Even when they finally have a quarterback that's like upper echelon and they have stars on the team, they're still bad because they're still the same old Bengals. And it's very reminiscent to the mid 2010s New Orleans Saints that didn't have a good offensive line and did not have a good defense. And Drew Brees was throwing for about 5,000 yards, but they'd finish like 7-9 because, you know, the team was just so bad around it. And that's exactly where the Bengals are at right now. Anyways, Cleveland
Speaking
Browns.
speaking of being bad forever,
Yes, Cleveland Browns. So their big move was re-signing Miles Garrett to an extension. Um, Amid all the trade yaps and trade talks, they make him the highest paid non-quarterback in the league, 4 years, 160 million. That makes 4 and 13 a whole lot easier. They made some minor moves at this point, nothing really too crazy. Notable move though was a trade that they made. They traded for Kenny Pickett, so they have a Week 1 starting quarterback as
well,
the creep will recover from his
well,
injuries.
they're also rumored to be in talks with signing Russell Wilson, which, Michael, if we were to play the fun game of, hey, remember when so and so was the Cleveland Browns starting quarterback at one point?
Yeah, I'd be shocked if they signed Russell Wilson. It feels like Giants and Steelers are having a little battle for the two available quarterbacks left. But they
Do you
traded for
think
Kenny
do you think
Pickett.
his wife is going to step in and be like, "There's no way you're gonna we're moving
We're
to
going to
Cleveland"?
Cleveland. Yeah, probably. But Kenny Pickett, good for him, I guess. He'll get another shot to be a starter more likely than not. Um, at least to open up the season until Watson gets back. They'll see how they decide.
Do you
But
think do you think
yeah,
Russell Wilson is like in a way killing his potential Hall of Fame candidacy by just doing what he's doing right now?
I think that would be wrong. You know what it's like? You know what's not fair, I guess? This is the perfect, not perfect, but this is a very comparable thing. So remember when the NBA had their 75th anniversary team
Uh huh.
and they left off Dwight Howard and it was like absurd, like very disrespectful. Dwight Howard definitely should have made that team. Like peak Dwight Howard in Orlando was MVP caliber
This is the
player.
last time they were relevant.
Like he was incredible in Orlando. Like his Magic years alone were Hall of Fame worthy. And then he continued it as being like a good role player. Anyways, towards the end of his career, when he was bouncing around from the Sixers, the Lakers back and forth, won a title as a backup center, was just bouncing around the league in Washington and Charlotte, Atlanta, all these teams that were like not great, and Dwight Howard's just there. And it gave everyone who didn't watch him play in Orlando this perception that Dwight Howard is just some like meme player that is like a fine backup center. And I think the kids that are growing up today that are only seeing Russell Wilson post Seattle are going to view him in a very similar light when Seattle Russ was one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And like you said, legitimate Hall of Fame case. And I still think should get in eventually. Um, but if people are going to put a lot of weight on these like back end years of his career, then, and I think that's wrong. I don't think that's fair to do. Yeah, I think that may hurt his case a little bit in a very similar way to Dwight Howard, where if you think of close your eyes and you think of Russell Wilson and the first thing you're seeing is like him in a Steelers uniform, like there's something wrong with you. If the first thing you're not seeing is him running around in a circle against the Cardinals, throwing it off his back foot to Doug Baldwin, who catches and runs for like a 60-yard touchdown. Like that's the sort of stuff I see when I close my eyes and think of Russell Wilson. I think of him dropping the bucket to Jermaine Kearse in overtime against Green Bay in the conference championship game. Like that's what I see. I don't see Denver or Seattle or potentially or not Seattle, sorry, Denver or the Steelers or potential Giants Russell Wilson. Like that's not what I'm seeing here. But regardless, I do think there's going to be a faction of people that are not going to remember Russell Wilson as fondly as they should be.
I mean,
Which
Seattle
then,
fans would go, but
yeah, which then takes us to the Steelers. They did everything but get their quarterback. They
wow, what else
purged the
is new?
Eagles a little bit. They got Kenny Gainwell. They got Darius Slay to a nice 1 year, $10 million contract. That'll certainly help out the um, back end of their defense. Mason Rudolph was brought back, someone they've liked in their quarterback room for a while. And then the big move that they made was also a trade. They trade and extended to a 5 year, $150 million contract DK Metcalf from the Seattle Seahawks. So you have like two of the most emotional wide receivers in football now. That it's an interesting fit together because I think they're very similar. They're both like physical specimen downfield threats that Pickens' great success comes from his spectacular catch, contested catch ability, and Metcalf kind of struggles in that department for such a big body receiver. His like contested catch rate is very unimpressive. Like it was 29% in 2023 and it was like 33% in 2024. Both are not very high for someone of his stature. Should be a lot better. But where Metcalf excels is when he does get the ball in his hands downfield, able to kind of run and make plays after the catch and just kind of show off that speed at such a freak size. And then, Pickens, like I said, those contested catches reeling him in. So maybe, I don't know, if you just bring back Russ and let him just heave deep balls to both those guys or Rodgers,
Well,
I don't
the
know.
whole point of Russ, so the whole point of Russ being let go was that the only two people that wanted Russ as the starting quarterback were Tomlin and Arthur Smith. Like
Hmm.
everybody else on the team thought Justin Fields should have just been the starter.
Which,
Because
like,
Russ has the tendency to like, I don't know, like he's just like he just rubs people the wrong way.
yeah, even though, I don't know.
You don't
It's
hear
not
his
like
former teammates talk glowingly about him.
no, but it's not like Fields was playing good, you know? He just wasn't.
Yeah, but like Michael, like they did win games with Fields at starting though. I mean, he's
They were
not good,
winning.
but like I know you listen. We get it. You don't like Justin Fields. Like we
He's
get
not
it.
good, man. He's
I
a
know he's
bad
not good. I'm
quarterback.
just saying, like, but my point. Listen, my point is that number one, the Steelers, like I don't know, they're like if there was a team that trading for Geno Smith would have made perfect sense, it really should have been them, right? For what
Yeah.
he
I thought Geno or at least like Darnold would have been a much better fit for the Steelers than leaving themselves to Russ or Rodgers.
I think the Steelers have sort of tipped their hand now with what maybe they want to do in this draft, i.e., hey, we got an Ole Miss wide receiver. Why don't we draft an Ole Miss quarterback?
We'll see. I think they'd be better off with Rodgers for a year and then getting a quarterback
Well,
next year.
funny thing about the Steelers is like people. I saw people commenting, like their fans comment on them. They said we should rename our team from this. Like we should rename it from the Steel City to the Drama City.
Yeah. Yeah, they get a lot of stuff going down there. But
Yeah.
I think I don't know, it's a weird fit because like, are you gonna really extend Pickens now where you have, like, 2 receivers that are good at the same thing? And, like, it to me, that move for Metcalf felt like they're moving on they're not going to extend George Pickens, and they're going to trade George Pickens eventually. That's what that felt like to me. Maybe they'll
Well,
let it run
remember they
for a
tried to
year, but
trade a lot to get Ayuk.
right. Like, they clearly were in desperation to get seemingly a number 1 receiver from somewhere else. And I think that like, I think they like Pickens the player, but Pickens has, he's got his issues
They're
where he's
trying to
not running
recreate what they
routes
did,
and
Michael. They're trying to recreate what they did in the late '90s, early 2000s, before they drafted Roethlisberger, where it's like, hey, let's just get a bunch of guys at skill positions and we'll just plug and play quarterback because we used to win 10, 11, 12 games doing that, which, that's great in 1999,
Yeah, it
but
doesn't work
it
anymore.
doesn't work anymore. Like, that's their problem. That is
Yeah.
exactly, they're like the Flyers of the NFL, is what they are.
Oh, that sucks. Okay.
Sorry.
Anyways, on to the AFC South. So the Texans were very involved in the trade department. They made like three pretty sizable trades, I would say, as their most important moves. Um, Free agency wise, they signed Sheldon Rankins, old veteran. They signed Justin Watson from the Chiefs. They brought back Ongunbowale. They brought back Derek Barnett. Um, just a lot of like depth-ish signings. Even Laken Tomlinson as a very cheap starter. But they made
Well,
trades, and they traded for Christian Kirk. They traded wide for Christian Kirk. They traded away Laramie Tunsil to the Commanders, and then they traded for obviously C.J. Gardner-Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles, and those were definitely their three most notable moves, all via the trade.
I think the
I guess,
CJ Gardner Johnson trade for the Texans is a great trade for them.
yeah, I think that works out really, really well for them, where you get a player that is capable, is a very solid safety in what's already a very good secondary. So
I
in a
mean,
similar light,
Michael, like they might have the bet. The Texans may have the best defense in the AFC now.
yeah, they could have. Yeah, they have a top defense in the NFL for sure. And when you trade for a guy like Gardner Johnson, and he's almost like he's like your weak link in the secondary, it's a very strong secondary because he's a very capable player, plays very well on the run, has very good ball skills to intercept the pass, versatile, can man up if you need to, even if it's not his most strong suit. And, strong locker room presence, brings that nasty attitude that is kind of required if you want to be a successful team in this league. So I think that was a great trade for them. They got Kenyon Green off their team, which, the fans almost threw a parade just for that alone. So clearly was not a fan favorite. And you replace him with Laken Tomlinson for just $4 million, who hasn't missed a game in 7 seasons of an NFL career, like just a solid body that should be better. And I'll say this, trading away Laramie Tunsil on the surface may seem like, oh, what do? You trade away your all pro tackle? When I said this off show about like the weakest link versus, an offensive line, if one bad guy on an offensive line can really tank the thing, that kind of goes, if you have a bad offensive line and one good part of the offensive line, that one good part is virtually irrelevant. It doesn't matter if Laramie Tunsil plays at an all pro level if the rest of the offensive line is so bad. You have a bunch of money tied up into one guy that isn't making a difference. It didn't feel like CJ Stroud was upright at all last year and Laramie Tunsil was playing. It's not like it was like, oh, thank God we have Tunsil because what would we be without him? You'd be the same. The offensive line was getting ran through like it wasn't even there anyways. And also, Laramie Tunsil led the league in penalties by like a sizable margin, holding penalties, pre-snap penalties, a lot of it. So while he's still very good, he has flaws, and it wasn't enough to just like keep him around for the sake of it being a great player. So I think getting the draft capital back, the Texans seem to be heading in like a right direction of like, okay, we have pieces, we have some core things here that we need to just kind of rework what's around it, and we'll be back in a spot where I think we feel good
It's really
about
hard to
ourselves.
rebuild an offensive line in one season. So, like,
Yeah, when it's that
but
bad, like
but when you're
it's gonna
that
take some
bad,
time.
but at the same time, when you're that bad, you got nowhere to go but up. But here's the thing, Michael: the Texans have a new offensive coordinator, because they fire Bobby Slowick,
Which, yeah, Bobby
and
Slowick's
their new
terrible.
offensive coordinator is Nick Caley, formerly of the Los Angeles Rams.
Mhm.
Here's the thing, Michael, is that we look at the Rams O line. they're very athletic.
Mm-hmm.
They run a lot of play action. Their O linemen have to be able to be very agile.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking that the Texans probably looked at Laramie Tunsil, like you just said, heavily penalized.
Mm-hmm.
If you have O linemen be able to move and have to block the edge, what do O linemen who are grabby do? They have to seal the edge, holding, grabbing, you
Yeah.
know, jumping early because they want to get an advantage. I mean, it makes sense on paper, but
Mm-hmm.
here's the big thing though: is that the Texans, like, their pass blocking was atrocious. Their run
Yes.
blocking, I thought, was good. Joe
Mm-hmm.
Mixon had a career year.
For sure.
So, like, we'll see. We'll see with the Texans, but obviously they're going to be they could be a team that's going to try to jump up in the draft to get a tackle. Like,
Yeah. They're you're gonna want a cornerstone that is just, hey,
the
it
draft
just
picks
sets
they
you
got
up.
for Tunsil, they're probably going to use to jump up in the draft to get an offensive tackle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which moves us to Indianapolis, where I thought, made some very, very nice moves on the defensive side of the ball. I think Trevarius Ward is due for a nice comeback season. Dealt with some. I think he's physically, like, very, very gifted, and he was dealing with some issues. And I think that I think Lou
Oh, when you said
Anarumo.
Travarius Ward, for some reason I thought of Tre'Davious White, and I was like, "What?"
No, no, no,
Oh,
Trevarius
sorry.
Ward. No. Um, Lou Anarumo, I think, was always a good D coordinator. I just think the Bengals had no players, and I think the Colts are actually willing to try to get their defense back up to snuff. Cameron Bynum had a really, really good season last year for the Vikings, and I think that that's a very nice upgrade. You're getting yourself nice defensive players to kind of help out what was a very weak unit last year. If we remember that Colts Giants game where the Colts had to win in order to keep their playoff hopes alive, and they let Drew Lock hang like 50 on them. Don't we remember this? That was a disaster. Um, and then, speaking of the Giants, they added Daniel Jones, 1 year, $14 million to, I guess, compete with Anthony Richardson. Listen, I've
Indiana
been,
Jones.
yeah. Oh my god. I've been high on Richardson. I think everyone agrees that there is talent there, and you just need someone, or himself, to just wake up, and it needs to be put all together in one. Yet we're not seeing it. So I think, you sent me this tweet, maybe I just saw it, I don't remember, but it was like, here is the perfect ultimatum. Beat out Daniel Jones, and if you can't do that, you're done. And I think that's pretty fair. Daniel Jones is about as bad of a quarterback as it gets, especially if as bad as if people want to consider a starting caliber quarterback, is easily as bad as it gets. So if Anthony Richardson, it's like a struggle in off season, and it's like hard to tell who's better between him or Daniel Jones, then yeah, it looks like it's about it for Anthony Richardson. I think it's solid competition. I think it's also a solid guy for, if Anthony Richardson is playing well, but he gets banged up because he's, a physical guy that has gotten banged up in the past. Daniel Jones is not the worst guy to step in for a game if he has to. So I think it's a nice little whatever move, maybe to spark a fire into Anthony Richardson or something. Daniel Jones, you've heard nothing but good things about him from his teammates in terms of what kind of teammate he is. He stood up there and answered questions of the Giants media every week like a very professional individual. Um, he was at the Super Bowl in Saquon's, like, family box. Like, he clearly leaves an impact on the players he plays with. So I think it's a nice move for the Colts. Maybe Daniel Jones, of all people, can help get Anthony Richardson's mentals together, put together his, body of work.
Yeah, Michael, I have a hot take that I've been
Hmm.
wanting that I want to share. That I don't think I've told you this. This is my hot take. I think the Indianapolis Colts are going to be the worst team in the NFL in 2025.
You have not shared that hot take with me yet. Wow.
They're going to be the worst team. they
Wow.
and honestly, listen, Michael, the only way this stupid organization ever's good is when they tank
Hmm.
out of nowhere,
Yeah.
right? They did it in 98 to get Peyton Manning, and then they did it in 2012 when Peyton Manning's neck was shot to get Andrew Luck. Who's going to be available next year's draft that basically why teams aren't exactly enthralled with Shedeur Sanders? It's going to be
Yeah.
Arch Manning. And
Yep.
listen, you don't think his uncle is going to tell him, hey man, I'm going to make sure to take care of you when you go to Indy, okay? Because he can technically Arch Manning can just go back to college, and collect NIL and basically pick which bad team he wants to go to.
You absolutely can.
Like, doesn't Shane Steichen look like dead coach walking?
Yeah, Shane Steichen, unfortunately, like the two ways that the Colts had missed the playoffs the last two seasons, where you had the one was Minshew kind of made a throw at the dude's feet, but the running back still should have caught it. That would have got him a first down against the Texans back in 2023. And then last year, like we said, the Giants' utter collapse where they gave up 50 to Drew Lock. If you also remember the must-win game against the Broncos, you have Jonathan Taylor dropping the ball before the end zone. Like little things like that, that when they happen more than once, it falls on the coach where he's clearly not doing a good enough job at like conveying the importance. Not that the players should need that, but you get what I'm saying. We're not seeing the Eagles do that type of shit. You don't see the Chiefs do that
I
stuff.
mean, I
You
think
don't.
I think he sold the Colts on being the mastermind behind the Eagles because Nick Sirianni used to work there. So they're like, oh, he's a
Sure,
dumb,
and you just
you
don't
know.
have the if you don't have the talent around you to actually flex the mastermind abilities, and then you're also not like doing all the other important parts of being a coach, the leadership qualities of it, you're not hitting those marks well enough. Yeah, you do feel like dead coach walking. So it'll be interesting to see. It's an
So
interesting
now,
take. I don't think they'll be
how does
that
this
bad,
relate to
but
their offseason? I mean, this just looks like a team that, the fact like signing Daniel Jones on offense when you
it's
have a
usually that's
quarterback.
usually like as bad as it gets for sure.
Like that's usually an indicator of, we're gonna see some Michael, we're gonna be sitting in a South Philadelphia parking lot
Mhm.
about 8 months from now, like lamenting, like, wow, we're gonna really watch like the Daniel Jones Colts play the Kenny Pickett Browns.
Browns, yeah.
Yep.
All right, on to
All right, go
the
ahead. I mean,
Jacksonville Jaguars. They made some nice moves, I thought. Jordan Lewis is an interesting signing. I think that's decent. They gave out a lucrative guard contract to Patrick McCarry. He wasn't a great pass blocker. Ranked 27th among guards in pass block win rate. He was, you know, last year though, he was one of the best. In that, sorry, run block win rate. That's my bad. Run block win rate. He was 27th among guards, which wasn't great, but he was a part of a good Ravens team that got him, obviously almost 2,000 yards. Uh, he was one of the best pass blocking guards, ranked fifth amongst guards. So that will be very helpful in keeping Trevor Lawrence upright. They signed a new center as well as Mitch Morse retired, and De'Ami Brown, which I like because De'Ami Brown, although has his issues, they trade away Christian Kirk. They need a new receiver to go along with Brian Thomas Jr. De'Ami Brown caught a lot of screens from Washington last year and actually proved to be pretty effective. Now, what do we know about what Tampa's offense has been the last couple of years under Liam Cohen? They run a lot of screens. So I expect De'Ami Brown to be catching a lot of screen passes once again this season.
yeah, James Gladstone, who like Michael, everyone's joking about, he's like the super young GM for
Mhm.
Jags now, and obviously you have Liam Cohen Duval.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the brain
Very
trust very
unserious.
young, is very young, but
Yeah.
like you notice how he basically got rid of the first thing he did immediately was just get rid of all the dead weight on that team like immediately and was
Yeah,
like
I think Liam Cohen's smart. Like, I think he knows what works and what doesn't, and he looked at what he was here and he was like, "I don't like it. I don't want it a part of my team. I'm getting rid of it." And, like, Christian Kirk was, like, the big get him off the team sort of thing. So, yeah.
yeah, and listen, like try to build up the O line. Like they got to do a better job protecting Trevor Lawrence.
Mhm.
They've obviously
Mhm.
never did that since they drafted him. Gladstone comes from the Rams. He knows how important it is to protect a quarterback that's taken a lot of hits. Matt Stafford. Yeah, like I think their off season has been solid. Like their free agency has been solid.
They're due for a bounce back season.
I would agree with that.
Takes us to Tennessee. Not much was done here. They let some guys go like Harold Landry. They brought in Brandon Allen as a veteran quarterback, but they're expected to draft one, but we will
Well,
be
they obviously
seeing.
their big signing was they signed ex Steeler left tackle Dan Moore Jr.
Mhm.
Which the Steelers had O line issues for years. Why would you let go of your best offensive lineman?
Good question,
Why
man.
to go get DK Metcalf? It's
Yeah.
kind of why the Steelers are the Steelers. I mean, here's the thing though, Michael. You look at you crapped on the Jags offseason last season, which was a very good take on your part, by the way. Good job.
Thanks.
Good
Thanks,
job.
man.
Good job. But like you're picking first overall. It's looking highly likely they're not going to trade the pick. They're going to stay at the pick and they're going to take Cam Ward.
Yeah, like, they also signed Kevin Zeitler to a one-year deal. Like, it just they got offensive line help where it's like, "Okay, we're drafting a quarterback, and we wanna keep him upright this year as much as we possibly can, so let's get some O-line help." And that's, it's always a good place to start. So, it's a fine offseason. They're in such a spot that, it's very Draymond Jones, though, they signed to a one-year, $10 million deal, the end that was I know a lot of Eagles writers were intrigued on adding if the price was right, so the price was clearly not right. On to a team that I thought had a very, very good free agency, the Denver Broncos. I thought they excelled tremendously. If we remember the conversations we were having during the season, it was like, I still think Bo Nix is not good. However, if you took a serious running back and a serious tight end to what they have, their offense would be just so much better than it already was producing at a pretty good level. And they go out and add Evan Ingram to a 2-year, $23 million deal, which I think that, Sean Payton has always had pretty good pass catching tight ends in his offenses. This is nothing different with Evan Ingram. They also added uh, Talanoa Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw from the San Francisco 49ers. And I think those are two enormous signings that I think are actually very, very good. They both got paid pretty nicely, and they got they got some like attitude and some nasty to them. The Broncos had a very good defense last year, but it didn't feel like tough. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was a good defense, but it was, like, a very good technical defense. Teams didn't, like, fear the Broncos defense. You got 2 guys that are gonna fly around and pop some heads. They are going to hit somebody. Dre Greenlaw, obviously, we know, is, like, a crazed person, and he only played 1 game last year coming back from injury 'cause then he hurt himself again. But in the 1 game, he did look pretty, like, healthy. You know what I'm saying? Like, he didn't look like he was losing a step. And then Talanoa Hufanga also is a guy that flies around and playmaking safety. He tore his ACL in 2023 and he missed some games last year. So hopefully for them, he'll be fully healthy, as will Greenlaw. So you got some guys with some injury concerns in Evan Ingram, Greenlaw, and Hufanga. However, I think that really, really bolsters your team a lot. And if they're in a position to draft someone like Ashton Genty, all of a sudden, that Broncos team might just be good enough that it doesn't even matter if Bo Nix is bad, which I still think
Well,
he
if
is.
Bo Nix's ceiling last year was what we saw out of him, like I think the Broncos, like if he's gonna be like a Christian Jesus, Kirk Cousins type quarterback, like you know, I think the Broncos can win the AFC West in like a Chiefs down year where everybody gets hurt or
They can
you
they
know.
can win a couple playoff games for sure, and it's like if your defense is cooking at such a high level, it won't matter if Bo Nix is like as long as like you tell like Bo Nix just don't turn the ball over, you're in a spot there, if you can lean on better running backs and stuff. So that's why like I really do think they're gonna draft someone like Genty because they did not address the running back like at all. Um, in fact, let guys go. So I clearly think they're going to be in the market for someone that's a dynamic running back.
Well, that's the big thing in Sean Payton's offense is they love to rotate their running backs to certain situations.
They love a dynamic running back, Kamara
But they
being the big
definitely
one.
need someone dynamic on their as a running back that you could use in the passing game specifically.
But also, like you said, the rotation's huge because you think about Alvin Kamara, he's been a great player in this
He's
league
never had
for
a 1,000-yard season.
exactly what I was about to say. Never had
Oh,
a 1,000-yard
sorry.
season for a guy that we collectively, I think, agree has used to be like top 5 running back in the league. Never hit 1,000 yards, and that's just how the Saints ran things, where he would get like 900 something, but he'd also have like 500 receiving yards, but they'd also have another running back that has like 500 rushing
The
yards.
guy that everyone just mocks to the Broncos is Omari and Hampton from North Carolina.
Hmm,
That he's
interesting.
basically like he's like the Sean Payton like type running back.
Yeah.
So with
So
that being said,
I was very high on the Broncos offseason. We'll see how Bo Nix is in terms of, how high their ceiling as a team can go, but I thought their offseason was very good. Chiefs, on the other hand, did
well,
not like their offseason at all. They replaced Wentz with Gardner Minshew. Uh, Jerry Tillery is just like no more than depth. Christian Fulton, no more than, some additional back end corner stuff. He'll be starting alongside McDuffie more likely than not, Elijah Mitchell, just like their classic sort of running back mix that they throw around. But they gave Trey Smith the franchise tag and they let Joe Tooney go. And I think that was a mistake. I think Tooney is still a very, very good guard. Heavy emphasis on guard. When he played guard, was really, really good. And when they moved him to tackle, wasn't as good because he's a guard. I don't know. He's a guard already that has short arms, and now you're sticking him at tackle because he's like smart enough to do it, but he's not physically gifted enough to do it. And this is what you get. Um, yeah, I think I
this
think
is
the
what the
Chiefs
Chiefs
got
do. Like,
worse.
well, they trade guys away and they still win games. That's kind of been their MO.
I think this year is a year that he's talking about a down year. At the very least, I don't think they're making the Super Bowl again this time around. I think this time they'll actually miss.
I don't think that's a hot take. I think
No, I
that's
don't think it
pretty.
is either. It's pretty
I
hard to get
you
there
know
4
I
times
do.
in a row.
I will say this though with the Chiefs. The Chiefs, if there's a team that should just do a retool, it's probably them because when their wide receivers aren't getting into legal problems. The wide receiver, like Rashi Rice and Xavier Worthy, that's not a bad wide receiver combo. They're on rookie deals.
Yeah, I mean, Rice just was hurt, like Mahomes tore his knee up. Like it
But if there's a team in the draft that could, in theory, you think like, wow, like what team could draft Cleveland from Michigan in the first round? It's probably them. I mean, we know how
yeah,
important the tight end is in Andy Reid's offense, which we've seen with Travis Kelsey.
and
You
they
know,
need someone to replace him eventually. Noah
someone
Gray's not that guy.
to get someone on a rookie deal that could give you Kelsey ish, possibly like back end Kelsey production.
Well, like it just by the time he leaves, like, he's gonna if this isn't, if he's not gonna retire after this year, it's soon, it's only a matter of time.
Well, the fact that like he is like I'm come it could this could honestly be like when Jason came back after they lost the Super Bowl, and he was okay his last year as an Eagle, but you could definitely see the decline at times,
Well, and you could tell that it was it, you could tell. On
right?
to another team that I was intrigued by with their
Oh,
offseason
oh boy,
is the Las Vegas Raiders. I think Alex Kappa is like a fine starting guard, nothing crazy. I think he's
wasn't
fine.
he the worst pass blocking guard in the league?
Yes. Listen, it's a fine you're not paying very much for him. You're paying like
Yeah, but
5.5 million a
like if
year
this
for
was
him.
like the Eagles, where you're like, Stoutland's gonna fix him. Okay, that's one thing, bro. What
Well, Pete
what if the
Carroll,
Raiders?
man.
If the Raiders suck, like
You don't believe in Pete?
listen, I'm going to tell you. Listen, here's my hot take. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. The Raiders are going to be in the driver's seat for the first overall pick through most of the season, and you're going to see the Colts are going to be like they're going to be like this. Try to get
Mhm,
like the camera. They're going
mhm.
to be like the Raiders are going to be like here. The Colts are just going to go like this, and you're going to see like some screwy. You're going to see what the schedule makers are going to do. They're going to set it up to where like the Raiders are going to win a game against like
Chiefs.
the Chiefs in a meaningless game where they're going to play all their backups,
Yeah, yeah.
and then they're going to
Something like
screw
that.
themselves out of the first overall pick. And then
The
Pete
big
Carroll's going
move
to just like pump his fist. He's going to be so happy.
the big move they made was trading for Geno, and I liked it. I didn't realize how old Geno was. I guess I should have known. He's been in the league for 12 years, but he's 34 years old. But listen, man, I like Geno. I still think he's
This
got
is
some
a
juice.
listen, dude. If you're for fantasy football, if you're worried about if you're apprehension on drafting Bowers again because you're like, how much ass quarterback play is he going to have to go through till it just like you know how it is in
Yeah, yeah.
fantasy with certain players when they have ass quarterback play. It affects
Yeah.
like listen, Gino. They're gonna Brock Bowers might be like breaking some single season records for tight ends.
Again? Kidding. But,
Yeah, no, that's not
um,
really a hot take, but
no, Geno's good. I like Geno, and I think that the Raiders, they could make some moves and help themselves out a little bit further in the draft. They could have a little frisky season, maybe not as bad as some people think, especially if Pete Carroll's as good as people think. But to round out the AFC, we have the Chargers, which I thought they had a pretty boring, uneventful, not great offseason. Their most recent move was signing away Mekhi Becton from the Philadelphia Eagles, 2 years, $20 million to be their starting guard. That will make their right side of their offensive line enormous with him and Joe Alt. I think that he, you know, Eagles fans, we'll talk about more about all the Eagles departures later, but I think he got overrated as the season progressed, and especially as we entered the offseason. Mekhi Becton was a very, very nice run blocker and was not a great pass blocker. And I think the fans and the NFL world grew like an emotional attachment to rooting for Mekhi Becton because of, all the nasty things that were said about him as a bust with the Jets, having the career resurgence, seeing him fall in love with the game of football again, seeing him be a part of such a special unit. He's a big guy and he's a big crier too. And I think everyone was rooting and loving on Mekhi Becton. Everyone except like NFL GMs, clearly because he couldn't get more money, and I thought it was a very favorable market for guards. I thought there was a shout he was gonna get almost 20 million a year the way these guards were getting paid. But seems like no one took the bait, and a lot of people, like you said, John, were like, there's a lot of times where these offensive linemen get signed away from the Eagles and they just struggle, whether it's because they lose Stoutland or because they're not part of as good of a unit anymore, whatever the case may be. Regardless, he's not getting paid a ton of money, and I still think is gonna be a solid starting guard. It's a solid signing. I think it's one of their better ones, to be honest. Um,
Well, they're
But
tweeting about it nonstop. The Chargers are,
yeah,
and to me, it's sort of like, see, the issue with Becton, his whole career was when he came to the Jets, he had high expectations. They thought he was going to be a franchise left tackle,
and he
and
just wasn't a good tackle.
he wasn't a good tackle, and you could tell that like the pressure of being in that spot really got to him. And then by going to the Eagles, there was no pressure at all.
No, it was like you're expected to be the worst offensive lineman on the guy. Like it's
But
not a
now,
big
but
deal.
now that they're like hyping him up, like I don't know, Michael, because like listen, the Chargers in that playoff game against the Texans. Granted, I just said the Texans potentially may have the best defense in the AFC. They couldn't block worth a damn in that
Yeah.
game.
Yeah. It'll
And
be
they have two
interesting.
really good tackles. So the thing with Becton, it's what's going to happen is he gives up a sack, he's going to get blown up on a play, and then all the Herbert apologists are going to be like, the Chargers just went out and signed that Jets bust.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mekhi
exactly.
Becton, he stinks. Da, da, da,
Yeah.
da, da. And he's just gonna. It's I'm not trying to give Mekhi Becton a hard time. It's sort of like, you know, is he someone that maybe fits in Philadelphia better because of the expectations and the coaching and like he's more protected here? Because look,
Yeah.
man, he's gonna go on that Chargers team. And listen, I think from a X's and O's perspective, the Chargers love to run the ball. We joked about like Justin Herbert being the best game manager in the NFL when because all they would do is just run the ball. And they just signed Najee Harris to replace Gus Edwards, which I'm not a Najee Harris guy, Michael, but he's definitely better than Gus Edwards.
I mean, he's the definition of a durable running back. He's gonna stay healthy and he's gonna take a lot of handoffs. But yeah, they signed Najee Harris, which I don't love. They signed Benjamin St. Juste, which I don't love at all. They brought back Mike Williams, which I think is actually a pretty decent move. Uh, I would have liked them to go after one of the bigger name receivers that were available. I thought Metcalf would have been a really nice fit for them. They also kept Khalil Mack, which you want to keep your talented players. I don't know.
I am very see. I look at this Chargers team. I look at Harbaugh, and I feel like he's going to try to make moves like he did when he was with the Niners.
hmm
I the fact they let Bosa go and they kept Mack, I'm almost on like 100% sure. The edge rusher from Tennessee, James Pierce.
hmm
They might just draft him because sort of like the Alden Smith. He's so
deal with
talented.
the yeah.
Oh,
So let's stay out west, and go to the NFC West and talk about the Seahawks. So they had a very active time. They traded away DK Metcalf. They released Tyler Lockett, and then they traded away Geno Smith as well and replaced him with Sam Darnold. And I think that that's an interesting move. I think it might be lateral. You get younger, I guess, which is better in terms of what the Seahawks are viewing as their window. You see the memes where it's like, man, Seahawks got Sam Darnold. It's a nice move. Maybe they could get someone like DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett to help shore up that receiving room. And it's like, oh, they had him. It's interesting. I'm not really sure what they're doing. They go and get Cooper Cup 15 million a year over 3 years, which I think is rather expensive for a guy that
can't
is
get
clearly
separation.
quite injured
Cooked.
as well. Like he was a nice player again for the Rams, but he was just hurt a lot again. And if the Rams don't want to keep somebody, they're usually kind of right on those. They're a pretty well run team in terms of
Dude,
talent
I remember
evaluation.
I remember when they played the Vikings on Thursday Night Football when Cooper Cup
hmm
came back in the lineup.
hmm
And I had a lay on the game. I had Cooper Cup anytime touchdown. Michael, they were straight up trying to get him a touchdown so freaking bad.
hmm
And he just couldn't do it for most of the game because he couldn't get any separation. And
Yeah.
listen, Tyler Lockett was probably like if we pull up their separation numbers, I bet you they're both very similar, right? But Tyler Lockett was never known as a guy that got good separation. It was he would get a little separation, but would always come up with the ball.
Right, and Lockett, notorious for staying healthy, never taking hits. It's just interesting. I think he pairs nicely JSN with Cooper Cup with JSN, but I don't know. I don't love their offseason. They got some defensive guys to help out that side of the ball, which I think is nice, but I don't know. I don't love their moves on offense. DeMarcus Lawrence, that feels like a washed sort of signing, but I don't know.
He's always hurt.
Right. All right. On to a team that lost a lot of players this year, and this is your like seems like they're heading in the wrong direction. The San Francisco 49ers. They obviously Greenlaw, Hufanga, they traded away Debo. They're an old team with the players that are important on their roster aren't that young, besides like Brock Purdy. And if they're clearly looking like they're going to be paying Brock Purdy, it's a lot of money tied up to however you feel about Brock Purdy. But McCaffrey's got like degenerative Achilles, if that's even a thing. Eh, I'm just wasn't totally inspired. Demarcus Robinson was like their big signing. They got Mac Jones eventually. Like they didn't do a whole lot of anything, and they got rid of a lot of stuff. So I don't know. I'm not that inspired by what the Niners did.
Well, I mean, when your big offseason signing was Mac Jones,
Mm,
and the reasoning being that, well, if Purdy gets hurt and Mac Jones was the guy that Kyle Shanahan wanted over oh my god,
Trey Lance.
Trey
Yeah.
Lance, excuse me. That was the guy he wanted.
Yep.
And listen, the Niners are in this position where they basically let a bunch of guys go. Like it was assumed that Joey Bosa was gonna go to the Niners,
Hmm.
and they didn't go there because the Niners just don't.
They're shedding salary.
Well, when you have
They're
when you have a potentially CTE riddled GM that doesn't know how to manage a salary cap properly, apparently doesn't know how to manage it properly. Well, this is kind of what happens. They're like, oh, we can't sign anyone because we got to sign Brock Purdy to like a huge extension. And you heard the numbers thrown around. They offered him $45 million a year, which is a lot and probably a fair contract. But unfortunately, that's not how the market's dictated because Purdy and his agent are going to say, well, if Dak is getting 60, we should get something close to that because my client is 2-0 in the playoffs. 2-0,
against them. Yep.
1-0.
Yep. So yeah. On to the Rams, where I thought they had a nice offseason actually.
Yeah,
Puna
it looked like it
Ford,
was going to go off the rails, and then
yeah, they
it
decided to keep Stafford, and then they signed Puna Ford away from the Chargers, which I thought was a good move. And their big signing, Devontae Adams as like their big name, I guess. I think he fits really nicely alongside Puka. For you look at an offense like McVay's, they run a lot of motion, especially using Puka in motion and all the other crap that they have moving around all the time. There's one guy that you're going to need to just be able to beat a guy off the ball, the one that's not in motion. Who's a guy that can beat press man coverage? Who's a guy that can get some separation off the ball? Devontae Adams is, been one of the best in the league at these sort of things. So I think that he fits really nicely in that McVay offense and is a nice like both Puka and Adams can still make very spectacular catches down the field in 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 traffic and contested. So Stafford, I think, will have now two options that he can just kind of sling it down the field to, and they can go make plays. And Adams definitely opens up things in the red zone as well. And it's I think it's a good move. It's a nice fit.
yeah, and I think the Rams might be the main competition for the Eagles Commanders and Lions / Vikings in the NFC. I think the Rams are the only team I feel like that's actually gotten better based off free agency. And they're a team that's already trending upwards. And they also have a really good coach. I know you're not like the biggest
McVay's a good coach. He's a very
McVay
good
guy,
coach.
but like, I mean,
He's
they were
very good. I
they were the
recognize.
closest team to beating the Eagles in the playoffs. So,
Yeah.
and like
Um.
McVay, I would say of all the coaches, McVay is definitely like, you know, the combination of scheme and culture, you know?
Yes, for sure. Um. On to the Cardinals. They had a little interesting offseason. They went and got some depth pieces on the offensive side of the ball, and then splashed a bit on the defensive side of the ball with Josh Sweat being the big one. Josh Sweat.
Josh Sweat is now is the most expensive free agent signing, I think, in Cardinals history.
Wow. Yeah, so he got 4 years at about 19 million a year to go back with his buddy Jonathan Gannon. He was a very big advocate of Jonathan Gannon's when he was here. I think he was very thankful for like just when it became Gannon. I think he was thankful like he was entrusted by him, and it kind of helped him fully break out. And then
I didn't
like
think
he
Josh Sweat liked playing for Vic Fangio.
I think he did. I think he did.
I think I'm going to tell you why I don't think he liked playing for Vic Fangio is because Vic Fangio would drop him in coverage, and I think when you're an edge rusher and you're asked to drop in coverage at times, you're like, oh my god, you're taking away chances for me to get sacks, and that's going to affect my wallet. Which I
No, for
get, I understand it,
I think he
but
liked Vic. I just think I don't know. It's all one and the same scheme. I think Gannon was the first guy to really let him kind of cook as a defensive edge rusher, and it helped him break out. Obviously, he had a great Super Bowl, and Josh Sweat will say like his strategy into the game was just to go get Mahomes, and like he loved that. So, um, yeah, I think that was I think it's a good move.
I want to pull up Josh Sweat's comments from his press conference. Josh Sweat, I'm sorry, you can keep
Yeah.
talking.
So Josh Sweat is a very good player. Has really kind of he like tapered off a little bit towards like last year, but then he ramped it back up as the year progressed. This season, he's a guy that unfortunately may not live up to the contract. You know, he's 28 years old. The biggest worry about him as a prospect was always his knees. Feels like it could be a matter of time before that age really starts creeping up and you see that burst really go away. Um, but he really liked Gannon clearly. The Cardinals needed, to help out their pass rush tremendously, and I think Sweat definitely helps that for at least, the first couple years of that contract. I think it was a good move. Understood that the Eagles were not going to be able to keep him.
I get this vibe that like ever since when Gannon left, he wasn't the same player as he was under Gannon. So I think maybe that whole like, I mean, I don't know. Like, here's the thing with Gannon is we've seen him before. Where like when he's interacting initially with Cardinals players in his introductory press conference, we're like, this dude's a dork. This is such a dork, and we're pissed about what happened in Super Bowl 57.
Mhm.
But at the same time, dude, like I don't know. To me, it's like with Josh Sweat, he was like, oh, I want to go somewhere where I can make a difference. And you're just kind of like, do you get the vibe that like he didn't like the fact that there was other guys whenever, as long as he was here, that were like,
Like, John, I'll be honest, like, no. I don't think there was any ill will about anything going on here that
not
is the
ill
reason
will,
why
but
he
not
left.
ill will,
Like,
but it's like, does Josh Sweat think he was better than he actually really is?
I think every player thinks they're better than they
Like
actually
being
are.
introduced as Sweaty J, and
I
like
think every player thinks they're better than they are. I don't know. I think Josh Sweat loved his time here and loved everything about it. And when he hired Drew Rosenhaus, like the week of the Super Bowl, he clearly was like, okay,
I'm
I
out of
am
here.
I'm making sure that I'm getting paid, and, like, he the reason why I know that he really liked it here was that he restructured his contract to stay here and made less money in order to stay here. It's what they're trying to do with Goddard right now. They basically bullied Josh Sweat into taking a pay cut. Like, they were like, "You know, we're gonna trade you, and we're not gonna get even much out of it, but we just gotta move on from you because we don't wanna pay you how much we're supposed to." And Josh Sweat was like, "Okay, I'll restructure the contract. I wanna stay here. I wanna be here." He won a Super Bowl. And he hired his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, to be like, "I'm gonna get paid. I wanna get paid big time. This is" I'm lucky enough to have even had an NFL career that has gone on for this long, considering, top high school recruit, was supposed to be a first round talent, but the knee issue scared everyone so bad that he slid to the 4th round. I think that he was like, "This is my opportunity to get my set for life type money. I can't miss it, and, like, I can't take the pay cut again to stay with the Eagles just for the sake of I really like it
Well,
here."
no, like I think my point being like I don't know with Josh Sweat, like you feel like he's like a homegrown guy that someone Howie would like to keep long term, and they never like he signed that like really team friendly extension like 3 years ago to keep him here,
Well, I
and
mean, just look at what they're doing. Like, there's no one that they don't love that is going to be here past the age of 30, and, like, they've made that very clear. They let go everybody, all of them. Like, that was exactly the MO of the offseason at this point. I don't think Josh Sweat was the exception, unless instead of taking 19 million, he was going to take like 10 million, which even then still was probably too much
and
for
like
what they're trying to
obviously the
do.
Bryce Huff contract
Right,
like
like the Bryce Huff contract,
screwing
I
things
think
up, you know.
definitely screwed some things up. You might have some different guys staying here if you don't have that, but granted, regardless. On to the NFC South. We can start with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Speaking of former Eagles,
Yeah, Hassan Reddick made his way down there. $14 million on a 1-year deal. Feels like he missed his opportunity here. But I think that honestly, if you get some production that you got when he was here, I think that's a really nice move for them. Um, Chris Godwin, they kept, which that feels like risky. If he's healthy, it's great, but the health is becoming ever more a serious question mark. Um, you know, they feel as though they're comfortable with him, but I don't know. I think that's super risky. Keeping Levante David, that's another just like, keeping your guys until he retires. They had a pretty quiet offseason, all things considered. I thought they made some all right moves. Um, we'll see how it all pays out in the end for
yeah,
them
so the
this year.
Tampa Bay Buccaneers promoted Josh Grizzard, their pass game coordinator, as their offensive coordinator. He served
Hmm.
under Dave Canales and Liam Cohen in that
Right.
same capacity.
Yeah.
So either like he's really like is he like the Baker Mayfield whisperer? Like, because Baker Mayfield, I mean, at this point of his career, like he should not have to need a good offensive coordinator to make him look good. Like he needs to kind of stand on his own 2 feet,
Hmm.
to a certain extent, right?
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. The Saints, uh, they had an interesting offseason. They kept Juwan Johnson and gave him a pretty nice contract. They also took Jack Stoll away from us. Um, Also was technically a
They
Dolphin
also
by the end of the
re-signed
year.
Chase Young, which like a lot of people were surprised. I think they thought he
Yeah,
was
they
going to
gave
the
Chase
market.
Young a lot of money, and I felt like Chase Young was not worth a $57 million contract. Yeah, don't really get that. I feel like that's a panic
Well,
move
Michael,
because of
Chase
Cameron
Young,
Jordan.
former number 2 overall pick. Michael, he's only 25 years old. That is
Yeah, but
why.
is he just that good? I don't think he's good.
Because I suppose, well, let me so this is something I just find interesting. So Kellen Moore goes and gets hired by the Saints, obviously. Doug Nussmeier was going to follow him because he's followed Kellen Moore, you
Mhm.
know, throughout his career. I was seriously worried they were going to hire Christian Parker away to be their new defensive coordinator because Michael Brandon Staley, he sucks.
Right.
I think he's been outed as an out and out clown and incompetent. Like Christian Parker is someone who a lot of teams view as a potential defensive coordinator slash guy with head coach potential,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
I
but
mean, now, I mean, the fact that he didn't want to go to the Saints
mhm.
kind of tells me what their prospects are if you're just not gonna want to take a job. Like, I think Parker is like the Fangio successor in
Mhm.
Philadelphia.
That
So,
would be nice.
which would be
Yeah,
nice. But yeah,
they also signed Justin Reed, which I thought was a nice move. Their safety duo is pretty good with him and Tyrann Mathieu.
I mean, the Saints are going to be bad, Michael. Saints are going to be
They
a
are gonna be
bad
bad.
team. They're going
There's
to be
no other way
bad
to.
this year. It doesn't matter who they draft. They're going to blow.
Yep. Carolina Panthers, they were rumored to basically land Milton Williams, and then they got it stolen right from underneath them by the Patriots, but they still made some moves. They got Tershawn Wharton, which I thought was a nice signing, to help replace that interior defensive line, and they also signed Bobby Brown from the Rams as 2 interior defensive linemen that I really think alongside with Derek Brown when he gets back from injury, the Panthers are gonna have a pretty frisky defensive line. I think they were one of the worst teams in the league defensively last year, and they were very aggressive on the defensive side of the ball. They
Well,
had a lot of money to spend,
Jiro
and they
Evero,
spent
I
it.
think, is one of the best or most creative defensive play callers in the league.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
you need players. Like, you can't
Yeah,
just
and they
now.
kept their good ones, they kept JC Horn, they gave a nice contract to Trayvon Moehrig, from the Raiders. They gave a decent contract to Pat Jones from the Vikings. They made some moves, man. I thought their defensive moves were pretty nice, and I think those were, you know, obviously you want to help out Bryce Young and stuff, but their defense was just so bad last year. They needed to make some improvements, and a good defense also helps a young quarterback. They also signed Rico Dowdle, 1 year, $3 million. I'm a little surprised. I don't know, like, did he really have no market? I felt like he would have had some sort of market
Well,
to
you're
go
in
somewhere.
a draft class where
I
there's
guess,
seven or
yeah.
eight running backs with starting potential.
No, yeah, it makes sense. It was a tough year for Rico Dowd at free agency. They
Well,
cut Miles
I think
Sanders.
so this is the thing with the Panthers. I think the Panthers are a team that if they have another strong draft, I think can be like the next perennial division winner in a really terrible NFC South. If
Mhm,
Bryce Young plays like he did the second half of last year, you cannot tell me that that will not translate into wins.
yeah. Uh, yeah. The Falcons, they were a little more aggressive on the defensive side of the ball as well. They signed Leonard Floyd, they signed Morgan Fox, Mike Ford, and, Divine Diablo as, you know, they got some affordable defensive players that are gonna be starters for them.
No, we're not going to congratulate them because of how they handle the Kirk Cousins situation. That's
Well, no, yeah. That w they set their franchise back, like, 3 years with that move, to, like, not even willingly wanna start him. Like, Kirk Cousins is gonna be the most expensive backup in NFL history, and it's just dumb, and they're kinda stuck with him at this point, unless they really try to trade him, but at this point, I don't think anyone wants to trade for him, so, yeah.
no.
Which takes us to the Vikings, who I thought had a really, really good offseason. I thought defensively, they built out a unit, man. Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, keeping Byron Murphy as well was a good move for them. Isaiah Rodgers, I thought was a very nice move as another contract that I think the Eagles would have been willing to match, but the Vikings are going to promise him a starting role, and that just seems like it's very hard to turn down. And based on what Isaiah Rodgers said, where he said it was a very difficult decision, that to me makes it sound like the Eagles offered him a contract to stay, but he took the Vikings deal as I'm going to be a starter, and the Eagles could not promise me that. Um, but I just their defensive line and their pass rush is gonna be lethal next year. It already was, and they just added more bodies. And I think someone like Javon Hargrave coming off, what was very disappointing in terms of his Niners tenure is gonna be pretty hungry to kinda rename himself alongside of some other ferocious
Well,
pass rushers.
I think with Minnesota, they snuck up on a ton of teams last year, and they're not going to have that luxury again. So I think they had to kind of have this offseason where it was like, we need to get more reinforcements because they did lose some guys too on the defensive side, very
Mhm.
much in and out. But their big thing was improving their offensive line because
Yes. Yes.
Sam Darnold, which look, he got sacked 9 times by the Rams. And listen, as much as we love to just crap on Darnold, like he was seeing ghosts, but at the
The
same time,
line was killing them.
their
They
offensive
were
line wasn't good at pass
yeah,
blocking.
yeah, yeah.
Now, with that being said,
Will Fries got a massive contract, 5
solid
years, 88
guard,
million. Good
definitely
pass
not the best
blocker.
guard in pro football.
No, good pass blocker though, and I think that's helpful. They kept Aaron Jones, which I thought was a good deal.
They also just made a trade yesterday to get Jordan Mason, everybody's favorite handcuff.
Yeah, and he'll be another handcuff this year. Ryan Kelly, I thought was a good move. They did some things for if they're gonna just ride with JJ McCarthy this year. Um, they did a nice job shoring up the rest of the roster.
I'm going to say this, Michael.
Are they gonna trade for who?
Well, I can't take them seriously if they're going to start JJ McCarthy at quarterback.
That's it?
Well, with that being said, there is, Michael, let's just, I've said this for a while now, and we all chuckled. We all were like giggling about it. Is Aaron Rodgers going to really, truly fulfill the Brett Favre career path and play for the Minnesota Vikings?
Listen, there is an opportunity there to do it. It will be interesting. It depends how they feel about JJ McCarthy if they want to let him play coming off the ACL
Did I share
injury
this? Did I
this
share a
soon.
tweet with you where somebody said the game losing NFC Championship interception from Vikings Aaron Rodgers is going to hit like crack in
It
Philadelphia?
would that would make me very happy, I have to say. But yeah, I think the Vikings had a really nice offseason. I'm intrigued to see if they just rock with uh, McCarthy or go elsewhere. But on to the Green Bay Packers, who they gave another lucrative contract to uh, guard Aaron Banks, which this it's always funny to say. I thought this one was probably the biggest overpay to start of all the guards, even though I thought it was a pretty high guard market. 4 years, 77 million. When the risk listed is it's a high price deal, but the structure will determine the risk in terms of how much money is up front. But this is the going rate for the starting lineman. When the risk isn't like anything other than yeah, hopefully it's not as much money, right away as it looks like because he might not be that good. But, at any rate, that's just kind of what all guards are getting. That to me is not very inspiring. Um, they needed some sort of pass rush help, especially on the inside, when the Eagles roughed him up. They got Nate Hobbs, which I thought was a nice little signing
Well, they're going to
as
get
a
rid of Jair
corner.
Alexander.
Yes, and that is the assumption. Um,
Do
other
you
than
think
that, that
Jair
was pretty quiet.
Alexander would be like a mid off season Howie pickup where it's like a 1 year prove it deal and then he just gets a
No.
massive contract?
No, I don't think he fits the culture of what the Eagles do. He's like he's like take CJ Gardner Johnson and somehow take CJ Gardner Johnson and make him less tough and more emotional.
Oh,
And like that's what you get with Jair in terms of like mental. and I don't think that helps very much at all. I don't think that's a good thing. Like, if the Eagles are gonna go trade for Jair, they were gonna figure out Slay. Like, that's my thought. Uh, the Detroit Lions, they took care of their D-back position outside of Slay, even though he wanted to go back if he wasn't gonna be here. They lose Carlton Davis, so they go sign DJ Reed from the New York Jets. That'll be an interesting move because he was a nice player, but we'll see right away if it's because he was on the other side of Sauce Gardner or if,
He was
he's actually that good.
if he was a Robert Saleh creation, like
Right.
it would have made a lot of sense for him to go to the Niners and just basically Robert Saleh just get all of his old guys back from the
Yeah.
Jets to come to the Niners. But as we said before, Michael,
Niners were
uh,
shedding.
the Niners, it's like you see the meme of the little boy at Five Guys, and
Yeah.
he's just eating the peanuts
Yeah, he
instead of
thought he
getting a
could get
burger. It's like,
Five
oh,
Guys
y'all,
money.
like you thought you had DJ Reed money, where instead you only had
Yeah. Brock Purdy.
bro, look,
No.
whatever, you know.
Yeah, Derek Barnes, as the linebacker, that's another just like draft picks that the Lions have decided to keep long term.
Well, Michael, here's the big thing with the Lions is look, they don't have a lot of cap space to spend. They've been re-signing all their players they've drafted that helped them get them into the position they are in now. Here's the thing, though, is this is the big difference between the Vikings and the Lions, is that the Vikings have a top 5 head coach in the NFL, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Probably closer to the bottom, obviously, than the top in Kevin O'Connell. His quarterback was a handoff merchant over in Michigan. And they don't have a game-changing running back like a Saquon Barkley to hand the ball off to.
No, they don't.
They're gonna have to aggregate a good running back now because Aaron Jones, I thought, second half of the year,
Okay, so comparing this to the Lions then
they're
is
the
what?
inverse. They have tons of talent. We don't know about their coaching staff because it got completely pillaged.
Gutted. Yeah, yeah. Well, we gotta see how they handle the coordinator shift. Yeah, that's fair. On to the Bears. I liked what the
I
Bears
think the
did,
Bears
man.
had the best offseason out of any
Yeah,
team in the
to
NFL.
start it off, like, simple, Olamide Zaccheaus, I thought was a really, really nice signing. Like, he does he does all the grinder things well. You talk about a role player
He was one of Jane Daniels' safety valves.
in terms of, like, a role player, like, that's about as good as it gets. I think he fits really, really nicely with DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. I think that works really nicely with Caleb Williams too, as like a bailout, a guy that's going to block. Um, you know, he's very versatile too, which helps with whatever Ben Johnson likes to do with his crap. They got a new center. They signed Drew Dahlman, 3 years, 42 million away from the Atlanta Falcons. I thought that was a nice move. Um, they also got Joe Tooney as a starting guard via the trade, and I thought that was a great move too. That beefs up the interior part of their offensive line so they can get a long-term deal. They traded for Jonah Jackson from the Rams. When you're trading for like stopgaps because you have nothing, it's very people are going to try to compare it to what the Commanders are doing, and we'll talk about the Commanders in a second because I want to shit on it a little bit because I don't think it's as good as the way people are talking about it. The way the Bears are doing via building through trades and trading some draft picks away, late draft picks specifically, is that these aren't like long-term answers for positions that were like desolate. They had some egregious offensive line play, especially in the interior. It was some of the worst I've ever seen in my life, like across any sport, like any level of football. They needed just guys to be like, "Okay, we are going to keep Caleb Williams on his 2 feet. He is not going to be running for his life virtually every play." And they handled 3 new players in for their 3 garbage players out on the interior, and while it's not long-term answers, it is, like, enough to where that we can show off our skill, we can let Caleb Williams actually sit back there and make passes, we can let Ben Johnson cook with whatever he needs to cook with because now he can at least have a little bit of time when throwing the ball. I just think it was desperately needed much more than the Commanders, if that makes sense. And then other than those offensive moves, they signed, Deo Odeyingbo. I very much have issues saying his name. 3 years, 48 million. Very nice pass rusher to go along with Montez Sweat, Grady Jarrett to help bolster up the interior of that defensive line. I think they had like you said, a really, really nice offseason there. And the draft, I think it's only going to get better.
Yeah, I would say what they did was very similar to what the Lions did in their rebuild, which is obviously begin with fixing the trenches.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bears sort of started doing that, and then they thought it was a brilliant idea to go trade for a 35-year-old Keenan Allen.
Yeah, really interesting decisions to make.
And
But
I think you can see
they're
that
righting
Ben
the wrongs.
Johnson, his fingerprints are on this roster. I don't think
Yeah.
he would have left the Lions so Ryan Poles can, run around and then brag to everyone that he got a fourth rounder out of the Eagles for Jalen Carter.
Yeah.
Like, stuff like things like that, like of that nature. Like, I don't think,
No, Ben Johnson, he's taking control of the situation. So
yeah,
now I want to talk about the Commanders.
oh
And
boy.
everyone's raving about it. Everyone's saying how great it is. Everyone's saying they're nailing it. They're building that roster around Jaden Daniels. They're helping them develop whatever, whatever, whatever. Trading for Debo Samuel, trading for Marshawn Lattimore last year, and now trading for Laramie Tunsil. Three key trades that traded what, a third, fourth, and a fifth round pick, maybe two fifths and like a sixth or something. You're trading a lot of your draft capital for those guys, like depth draft capital. And this is the risk that comes with having a lot of cap space. When you have a ton of cap space and your goal is to fill it via trade, I think that's an extremely short-sighted decision. I think that what the Commanders are doing is like building a 2-year window, maybe only 1 year with Jaden Daniels, and I just don't think it's a great move, and I'll tell you why it's different from the Bears. You look at the Bears and it's like, well, the Bears are doing the same thing. It's like, sure, but the Bears weren't in the conference championship game last year. The Bears were terrible. They lost like 12 in a row last year. They needed desperately to fill some holes in order to even join the rest of the league in terms of competence. You look at Washington, they had a great season last year. Went to the conference championship game. Rookie quarterback took you there. He looked really, really good the whole season. Everything was great about it. When you look at someone like Jaden Daniels, he's already 25 years old or turning 25 years old before the season starts. I'm not saying it's impossible for him to get better, but if there's another level of like what Jaden Daniels can be, I would be thoroughly impressed because guess what? He's already really damn good. There are legitimate arguments that you can make to say that he's a comfortable top 10 quarterback. Like, and that is a damn good place to be from your rookie season. When you look at building a roster, the Commanders are doing it like it's Madden. Like, oh, I can only trade a fifth round pick for Laramie Tunsil. Oh my God, do that in a heartbeat. Or third round pick for whatever it was for Laramie Tunsil, a third rounder. I'll do that in a heartbeat. Why do I care about a third round pick when I can get one of the best left tackles in the league? It's like, well, you got a tackle that commits a lot of penalties and when he's out there is very, very good. But what are you going to do in a few years, when his contract is coming up, when he is going to be a free agent in What year? In 2027, in 2 years. He's got 2 more years left with the Commanders here. My point is that between Laramie Tunsil and Marshawn Lattimore and Deebo Samuel and signing not wanting to keep Jonathan Allen, but then turning around and giving Javon Kinlaw $15 million a year when Allen only got $20 million a year, it feels like just a misallocation of resources. And when I say it's short-sighted, it's who on the team currently is going to be around for when Jaden Daniels is getting his extension long term? I can't think of one skill player or really almost even an offensive lineman that I expect to be here in 4 years when Jaden Daniels is making $60 million a season. And I don't know if the Commanders are smart enough to build their contracts the way the Eagles do in order to afford all these sort of guys. You look at, for example, what the Eagles did when they made the playoffs in 2021, and it was like, okay, we have a young quarterback here that we want to commit to long term. We want to get guys that are going to be here for a while. They didn't go trade for a 32-year-old, you know, DeAndre Hopkins, for example, to go help out Jalen Hurts and bring up his development. They didn't trade for a 29-year-old Deebo Samuel type of receiver to help out Jaden Daniels' development. They traded for 25-year-old AJ Brown and extended him right away because they're like, okay, as long as we have Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown is absolutely going to be on this team. Devonta Smith, they went and drafted, is absolutely going to be on this team the whole time. They went and got out young guys or age prime guys and extended them throughout the length of as long as you're going to keep the quarterback here. When Jaden Daniels gets paid his second contract, Deebo Samuel is not going to be on the team. Terry McLaurin might not even be on the team. Those two guys are going to be 34 years old when it's time for Jaden Daniels to get paid. How good does anyone think they're actually going to be there? So this is not to say that they're going to suck next year or anything like that. But if they don't really push themselves and win the Super Bowl next year or the following year, I think they're going to be in a position where they're not going to be a deep team because they're trading away all these draft picks where that's where you build your depth. Oh, how are the Eagles so deep? All these players that are like, oh, you know, Brandon Graham gets hurt. Here comes Jalix Hunt. That was your third round rookie. Oh, you rotate your D lineman. Where did Morojomo come from? Oh, he's our second year, seventh round pick. Oh, Keely Ringo's got to step in. That was another, fourth round draft selection. All these guys that are depth players that the Eagles were able to bring in and the Eagles were able to play with is because they kept those late round draft picks and they were using them and they were drafting well. Obviously, you got to hit on those sort of picks, but they had them. The Commanders don't even have the draft picks to even make those selections. They're an injury to Terry McLaurin away from having like no receiving core. They're Laramie Tunsil getting banged up away and the offensive line's in shambles again. Like they don't have the depth to make up for potential injuries or other lacking of their star players not playing too well. And they're going to be a top heavy team for a couple years. And I get you want to maximize the rookie contract window of Jaden Daniels. I just think there's a smarter, more sustainable way to do it. And it's by, I'm not saying, oh, they should have went and just got T. Higgins instead, but going out and trying to trade for a player like T. Higgins, who's 25 years old, would have been a much more beneficial draft acquisition than 29-year-old Debo for one more year, just to have a guy who's 30 and if you want to extend him, he still won't be here when Jaden Daniels has to get paid. I just think a lot of their moves are very, very short sighted. And I think it can come back to bite them in the next 4 or 5 years if they don't win something in the next two.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's
I'm not saying these guys are bad players,
no, it's
but I
very
just
in
think their
depth.
vision.
I,
Yeah.
I'll just kind of I'll my take on the Commanders off season, similar along to your lines. But mine's more short and sweet. The Washington Commanders. This reminds me a lot when Daryl Morey, his first or second off season with I think his second off season with the Sixers was bringing in a bunch of players that he used to GM with
Hmm.
or over on the Rockets.
Hmm.
And Kinlaw, former Niner, Debo, obviously former Niner.
Hmm.
He's just bringing in guys that were, probably guys he really loved when he was the assistant GM over in San Francisco. And like Kinlaw was kind of a bust when he was with the
I
Niners.
mean, Kinlaw was just not good with the Jets. Like he straight up was bad.
And like Debo, 1,000 yard receiving season, obviously a result of a really creative play caller. I mean, here's the thing with the Commanders is they talked about all the draft picks they had and all of like the cap space they have. I don't think this was the best allocation for it, and Jaden Daniels covered for a lot of some of their questionable moves. Like Michael, the Eagles are called. You're the Commanders. The Eagles are blowing you up because they want to jump up to where you're picking to get Cooper DeJean. Doesn't
Hmm.
the thought cross your mind of, wow, man, the Eagles really want this guy. Maybe we should draft him. Or
Yeah, or maybe we shouldn't trade up with them and let them try to call someone else, anything like that. Who knows, man? I We'll see. Like, as long as Jane Daniels is healthy and stuff, they're gonna be good. He's a very, very good quarterback.
but
But
I think they're a team that's very similar to the Vikings where they snuck up on a bunch of people, and I don't think they can do that again. They gotta like you need to retool. Like that's why the Vikings were so aggressive
yep,
retooling their roster because they know that.
but they did it via, I don't know, just smarter decision making. I don't think trading away all your middle round draft picks for aged stars or former stars
Do
to
you
fill
notice
up
the two
said cap
teams that were
space,
in the Super Bowl this year are heavily built through the draft, not free agency or trades?
Well,
Do you
that's,
find that? Do you find that like an interesting? Like, do you find that like is a very
yep, yep,
common denominator?
yeah. On to the Giants.
It's
I
really
don't
hard to hate their off
Yeah.
when they're just that pathetic. You
Yeah,
know,
I don't think their moves, like, sucked, but, like, I do think they overcorrected. Like, I like Javon Holland as a player, but when you let guys like Xavier McKinney and Saquon go, and then you turn around and give more money to Javon Holland and Darius Slayton, it just seems like a little overcorrection, but I think as the general offseason that they had was pretty decent. Um it's not done though, because it looks like they're going to either get Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson. It feels like those 2 it feels like the Steelers are, like, in the driver's seat in terms of they are going to pick which one they want, and the Giants are just gonna get the other one. The other one's gonna have to go to the Giants.
apparently the Giants were really heavily in on
Yeah,
Freeze. They were, and then they
yeah.
just missed out on him, and it really makes you think. So like this is like what the we like I don't know, Michael. Before we talk wrap up with the Cowboys and Eagles, are you a little just tired of the overly optimistic Homer Giants fans?
Nah, they can be idiots if they want. I don't
Like
mind. I don't mind them being stupid.
like this idea that, oh, if the Giants get Russell Wilson, they can win 11 games.
No, like, that's just not happening.
This was like
Why would
this
that
like the
happen?
Giants ever since Brian Dable became the Giants head coach, they have been probably the worst offense consistently in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, you got a bad quarterback, man. Yeah. So, yeah, it is interesting. Now, to go with the Cowboys, this won't take long because there is not much to talk about. They kept Osa Odigwazua. They gave him a lot of money, which kind of set that interior D line market as high as it did. And then they just added a bunch of like former busts or flameouts like Solomon Thomas, Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders. They just signed Paris Campbell today, Robert Jones, Dante Fowler. Like it's just a bunch of guys. Peyton Turner, Kyer Elam, Kenneth Murray. Like every guy they added was like someone that used to be good or never panned out, and they just got him for cheap
Do you
because the
think the Cowboys
Cowboys
could
are
finish
cheap.
in last place this year in the NFC East?
Depends the quarterback in New York. Like if it's Rodgers and it's just like a guy that is talented, maybe. Um, if Dak's healthy, it is hard to believe though, because like if Dak and Lamb are healthy, you have a decent enough offense to
So
be
their
able to put up
defensive
some points,
coordinator is Matt Eberflus, who
right?
you want to talk about a crash out.
Yeah.
Like it's like, dude,
Yeah, Cowboys are they're not doing much of anything. The Cowboys, it's like a slap in the face. I saw someone hypothesize that the Jones family doesn't have as much money as we may think because they restructure cap space every year, but then they don't spend it in free agency. They still have yet to sign an external free agent to a contract worth like where the annual value was more than 6 million a year. The last time they did do that was
Greg
2015 with
Hardy.
Greg Hardy. So people think that the Cowboys clear the cap space because they need to pay for like their land and like boats and other crap that they own. Who knows, man? That could be true because it does seem insane to me that you restructure every single year CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott's contract and you create all this cap
Well, I
space
mean, Jerry
and you don't
Jones
spend a
is
dime.
so Jerry Jones has always been considered the owner that's always been the most anti-union, like anti against the players, like making money.
Right.
And well, the fact that he hasn't, like you just brought up, hasn't spent more than $6 million on a free agent since in like 10 years, sort of just reinforces that fact.
Mhm. Yeah,
I mean, it's. I mean, listen, man. Like the son is an idiot. Like his son. The idea that like you see Cowboys fans say, "Oh, when Jerry, we're not going to get better until Jerry Jones dies."
right.
As morbid
That's
as
what
that
I think of.
sounds, like
Yeah.
in theory, it sounds like it's true. But when you hear like his son going like, the Eagles are just they're not built for long term
It's only a
success."
matter of time. It's like,
Which
okay, man.
apparently now, like their fans are saying he's been saying this for 10 years, and like it's obviously not true.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that leaves us with the Eagles, which we've already kind of talked about a lot in detail, Michael, like with other moves from other teams. But I
It's just
mean,
there's general that we just need to, I think, get out the way. I All the moves that they made or at least let happen against them, I am not surprised. Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, Oren Burks, Isaiah Rogers, Mekhi Becton, Darius Slay, all of the guys that left, Kenneth Gainwell even as well. I'm not surprised. The only one that was surprising was CJ Gardner Johnson. But even after the fact, looking at it, I see where they're coming from. It makes sense, the whole been on 4 teams in 5 years thing, like, that holds some weight, clearly. There's something there that they put up with that they realize, maybe enough's enough. They're freeing up cash, not necessarily cap space, but cash to eventually turn around and give Jalen Carter a huge contract. CJ Gardner Johnson didn't seem too shaken up about it too. When he was talking on stream about it, he was like, listen, I know they got young guys that they got to pay down there. And, he said, oh, just trade me somewhere where I can win. And they sent him to Houston, where that's a team that maybe he can win. Um, when Jalen Carter's extension hits next year for like 5 years, $200 million, all this is going to make a little bit more sense. Um, but I wasn't totally surprised by everything. So those are the players that they lost. In terms of what they brought back, obviously you re-signed Zach Bond, massive. Re-signed Ben Van Summeren, that was nice. He'll be your fullback. And then you added some very low risk players. I want to start with the Dory Jackson because that feels like the direct Isaiah Rogers replacement. That's a guy that can play both the inside and the outside. I'm sure we'll see him on the field in dime package. He's going to compete with Keely Ringo for the cornerback 2 role opposite of Quinyon Mitchell. He used to return some punts. I don't expect he will anymore, but maybe it's a guy they prefer to put back there instead of Cooper DeJean. Overall, when Adoree Jackson plays, he's a nice player, but he just has been a little banged up recently. But I think that was a nice little signing for them for sure.
Yeah, I mean the Eagles they signed a ton. They seem to be really intent on revamping their special teams by letting Rick Lovato go, which
Bringing a new
it's
long snapper,
which
Charlie
it's
Hewitt.
it's almost insane to think that Rick Lovato has the same amount of championships in Philadelphia as Bobby Clark,
Oh man, well that's
Bernie
just the
Perrant.
spin. Oh wow, okay. They
Yeah,
also signed some other notable ones. AJ Dillon as the backup running back. I think he does. Obviously he's very different from Kenny Gainwell. AJ Dillon is not very fast, and he's a huge body. But what he has some similarities with Gainwell is he's a good pass blocker and he's a good receiver. So in those situations where they like to throw for like late in the half or something, and Saquon's on the sideline. It was Gainwell out there. I think we'll see Dillon out there on those sort of roles, even though they do still have Will Shipley. Provide some
well they
competition for
signed
Shipley.
Avery Williams from Atlanta as a punt slash kick returner, which obviously signals to me that they do not want Cooper DeJean returning punts anymore, as Vic
Yeah, yeah,
Fangio
no, for sure.
clearly
And
bellowed
that's
over the last several years.
yeah, and that's your replacement for Britton Covey, who will no longer like probably not going to be on the team. I wouldn't expect.
No, he's a free agent.
So in addition to some depth, they also got Joshua Uche, 1 year deal. He had 11 and a half sacks in 2022, and then every other year of his career, he's only had three. Interesting depth piece. He's only 26 years old. You know, their edge room was pretty light, with Sweat leaving and Brandon Graham likely retiring, is retiring, So they got some bodies in there. I think Uche will be a nice little addition for them as well. And then they signed a bunch of tight ends. They signed Kyle Kylan, sorry, Kylan Granson, Harrison Bryant, which it's some depth, to compete with sort of the back end. Potentially, if they do end up trading Dallas Goddard, that is just filling out the rest of your tight end room. I do think there's a chance that they could draft someone and end up cutting two of those guys anyways, um, or they could, you know, essentially bully Dallas Goddard into taking the pay cut, similarly to what they did with Josh Sweat, where it was like, oh, we're going to trade Josh Sweat, and then he didn't want to go anywhere, so he took the restructure. Maybe Dallas Goddard, this sort of same thing happens where they're like, all right, we're going to trade Goddard, and then he takes a restructure for one more year, and then he ends up walking in free agency. We will see. I would love to keep Goddard again. I think he's a very nice luxury to have. It's a very nice option to bail you out
It doesn't
sometimes.
make any sense to let him go when you consider that they already have cap space freed up from other moves they've made, and like getting rid of him to not bring in anyone else does not make any sense.
Yeah, and a reason like I don't think they would trade Goddard until after the draft anyways, because like we said, the Eagles hate entering the draft where they have an obvious need. So it's why I do think they'll still probably sign a safety, for example, as a veteran to maybe, as competition for Sidney Brown. Or if not, you might just hear a few stories come out about how much the Eagles love Sidney Brown to make it seem like they really, really like him if they want to go draft one.
Uh, I think the Sidney Brown love to me is like a the beat writers were saying like, oh, Sidney Brown. Like, no, I think the Eagles. Listen,
Well, yeah, that's my whole point. Yeah, exactly.
oh, I see what you
Like
mean.
saying it so that teams
It's a
across
smoke
the
screen.
league think, yeah, exactly. So, um, would I say the Eagles are having a good off season? Like, I guess not. I don't know. They're letting a bunch of guys go that I think everyone expected to go besides CJ Gardner Johnson. And other than that, they're just kind of like last year was a very expensive year for the Eagles in terms of cash spending. A lot of bonus money got thrown out, a lot of money just got tossed out a lot. So this is kind of like a little reset in terms of resetting your cash, bringing up some cash. You gave Saquon a raise, which is another thing. Like, you don't have to do that, but it's a way to kind of just it's how you build that reputation and getting star players to want to come here and stay here because you're
I,
proving
I
that if you play well, you are going to be taken
Michael,
care of.
I think that the Eagles, there is a player in the draft, possibly first round, where or might fall to like early day two. It's defensive back they really love, and they were like, it doesn't make sense to draft this guy if CJGJ is on the roster.
Yeah, listen, I I think there's a lot of angles that point towards that, and we'll see how it all wraps up. I mean, there's probably not going to be anything too noteworthy in the NFL until the draft at this point. So next week, and from here on out, we're going to talk a lot more baseball throughout the summertime,
Yes, I
and
think we're gonna
very
talk more.
excited.
Yes, I think next week is gonna be kind of like our baseball like premiere show. We're gonna talk about the divisions. What I guess we'll talk about each team, where we think how they'll do.
Yeah, we'll
Obviously,
go
talk
through the
about
divisions and give a final. We'll at next week we should have the rosters, Phillies roster. A lot to talk about baseball related. So that is our show.
that is our show. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. What's left. And if you're going out for St. Patrick's Day, stay safe.
Hmm.
We are part of the Fired Up Sports Network of shows. Please check out other Fired Up Sports Network podcasts like the P-Lot Pod, Water Cooler Talk, Bell Smashers, Philly Sports Love and Pain, Drunk on Broad, Beer Battered Sports, and the Fired Up Sports Show, which are available on all major podcasting hosting sites and social media. Also, check out Mark Ramos' Roundup on firedupsports.com, which breaks down the happenings going on with all your favorite local teams.